Chapter 39. The thick clay. Some say the dead cannot cross the water. He had placed them there, his flock of rebellious souls, who in life had been nothing more than instruments filled with hate and fear. He had always believed that all actions could be reduced to two motives, fear or love. Killing might seem like an act of hatred, but it wasn't. He loved each member of his growing congregation. Their deaths had given him the greatest gift, and he returned it tenfold. They lay beneath the earth, their earthly beauty preserved forever. The air smelled of decay. Most would blame the mud, a stew of the endless low tides of bacteria, water, and decomposing organic matter under the humid southern heat. From experience he knew that submerging a body immediately after death preserved soft tissues, skin, hair, organs. The thick oxygen-poor clay drowned the microorganisms that cause decay, just as he did with his art, as Mother Nature does. Yet he was still perfecting his technique. He set the fishing line, and watched as the heavy float touched the water nearly 20 meters away, sending ripples that reflected the afternoon sun. The mud came up to his knees, stiffening his beige shorts. He lifted his boot with the sucking sound each new step made, watching the mud fill in his footprints. He had seen novice fishermen wait too long and sink waist deep before freeing themselves. He knew every zone, every boundary of the salt marshes like the palm of his hand. From there he could see for miles. The horizon had no obstacles, only low horizontal lines dissolving into the mist. He tried to imagine the same landscape centuries ago, when, on clear days, perhaps the profile of Esbjerg could be seen from the heart of the island. Then the tide would retreat, leaving a wet desert, infinite fields of sand and mud stretching as far as the eye could see, shimmering under the brief summer sun. But it was not a warm landscape. Not golden. The sea in the distance was never blue. It was gray. A thick metallic gray, as if the sky had poured itself over the water. Here the light did not embrace, it revealed. Here the wind did not rest, it shaped. And everything seemed larger than a body could contain. Not that faded blue with which superstitious naval merchants painted shutters and verandas to ward off the dead, bound to the world by the force of revenge. The sagas said that a man's word was his iron. If he bent it with lies, the iron turned against him. That's what the Viking sagas said. The dagger in its sheath brushed his leg, wishing to be used for something more than fish. There was time. Maybe 4 or 5 more days. A tug on the line signaled the prey. He jerked the line, adjusted the hook, and slowly reeled it in. His pulse roared in his veins. Patience is a virtue. Chapter 40. The Blue Hue. Seeing Signa's white Volkswagen Passat in the driveway, Agnete turned toward her own house instead of continuing to the main one. The black iron gates closed automatically behind her with a sharp clang. Luckily, Jonas's car wasn't in sight. Today she didn't have the patience for him. They had grown up apart, they no longer shared anything. He valued his French shoes too much. Signa's house needed a fresh coat of paint, and Agnete decided the painters would start there after finishing the main house, a gift from the 3 of them for everything Signa had done since their mother's death. Impossible to repay fully. She knew Caroline and Sanna wouldn't complain about the extra cost. But Signa was a perfectionist. Every shade of blue on the door, shutters, and veranda mattered. Maybe they should start there, and then use the same tone on the main house. Agnete thought of the magic of sea superstitions, water and sky as barriers between the living and the dead. Signa believed in that. She hated the old mirror in the house, claiming she had seen too many deaths. Outside, Signa had created a bottle tree from dead red cedar, decorated with old blue bottles of all sizes. Nothing you could buy online came close. Her roots in northwest Jutland were as strong as her accent. Signa said that when the wind blew at the end of the afternoon, trapped spirits whispered through the breeze. At sunrise the sun burned them, preventing them from stealing the souls of the living. Agnete didn't believe in ghosts, but the sight of the tree comforted her. On the veranda, she recognized the terracotta planter she had painted for Signa at 9 years old. Still intact even with the crack. A loving hand had cared for it all this time. Agnete looked at it for a moment, before Signa opened the door wide. "Hey," said Agnete, feeling strange. Signa arched an eyebrow. "Are you going to stand there all day?" "Come in," she said, drying her hands on the dish towel. Agnete followed her into the kitchen, with a view of the saltgrass by the beach. The house was far enough from the water that Signa didn't have to worry about the tide, but close enough to see the end of the pier. Waterbirds, terns, oystercatchers and common eides marked the horizon. "You didn't come for coffee, I'm sure," said Signa, "but I just made some if you want." "Sure," Agnete replied, placing her bag on the counter. "Half decaf." Signa poured it. Agnete sat on a bench, uncomfortable, aware she wasn't in her own home and had to respect the space. She observed the kitchen. Indigo and white tones, cabinets that looked old but were new, everything hid work and utensils, as if Signa avoided any reminders of chores. After nearly 60 years of hard work, Agnete could imagine that disdain for tasks. "I see you're putting the money to good use, Signa." "Mom would approve," said Agnete. Signa set the cup in front of her, hands on her hips. "I remodeled this kitchen 10 years ago. If it looks new, it's because I'm only now using it and you weren't around. Now, what are you doing here? I know it's not for coffee." Agnete raised her eyebrows, embarrassed. "Is it that obvious?" Signa looked at her steadily. "What do you think?" She sighed and told her about Sanna's sudden departure. Signa listened silently and then said, "I've moved past that, Agnete. I don't blame Sanna one bit. We've all been sensitive lately." "And Kirstine?" asked Agnete. "I know she loved Rosa." "Melancholy over Mikkel. She helped him grow. I hope they find him alive." The word hung between them, unspoken but felt. Agnete sipped her coffee, and Signa suddenly took her hand. "It's good to see you, Agnete. I thought you'd never come back. I'm sorry for what Jonas might have told you the other day. He just feels rejected, but it's better that he's away." Agnete lowered her cup. "I don't think he's forgiven me for moving." Signa nodded. "Maybe, but he has other problems." "Like what?" "A job. He quit. And the house on Strandgate, he's taken it all for himself." Agnete frowned. "Your father's house?" Signa gently touched her hand, taking a breath. "Yes, and there's something else I need to tell you. Not about Sanna, but it's time to settle accounts." "Oh," said Agnete, crooked smile. "You stole the money." Signa shook her head. "Your mother never wanted you to know, but Fredja is gone. Jonas is Frank's son." Agnete nearly dropped her cup. "Dad." Signa nodded. "Jonas is my brother," Agnete repeated, unable to process it. Signa cried. "So many lies. God, I wish I could undo it all." Agnete couldn't move, just watched. Everything around her tilted. Jonas was her brother. She had kissed him once, and if he hadn't said no. Signa pulled herself together. "You don't have to say anything. I'm glad I told you first. We never wanted to involve you or Jonas." Something volatile rose inside Agnete. But she stayed calm, even as the world collapsed. "Does Jonas know? Did Dad know?" "Yes and yes. That's why Jonas isn't running for mayor anymore. He's angry with me and with Frank," Signa nodded, wiping her tears. Agnete stayed there, cup empty, feeling regret for her mother for the first time. How horrible it must have been, surrounded by expectations and betrayals, her dead son, her daughters full of resentment. "I wanted to tell you first," Signa said. "It seemed important." Agnete let herself be hugged. She held her tightly, burying her face in her chest. They stayed like that for a time that felt eternal. "Will you ever forgive me?" asked Signa. Agnete nodded, still unable to meet her eyes. "We should have told you a long time ago," Signa lamented. "Your mother said no, she wanted to protect us. Now you understand why she couldn't leave." Agnete didn't fully understand, but she let herself be carried along. Finally she stood. I have to go. Agnete. Signa called, but she had already left. Chapter 41. The accusations. Mads had never planned to become a one-man army dispensing justice. When he arrived in Esbjerg, he tried to seek help from the police, but he ran into closed doors both literally and figuratively. Then Caroline Aldrichsen appeared, and suddenly he was dodging accusations like bullets. The decision was easy. He told Jacob everything he knew, how the accusations against Julie Wilhelmsen had arisen, the story of his family, and why he felt compelled to find her, especially now that she might be in the hands of a killer. His father was dead. His mother relied on an uncle who coincidentally was a deacon. That uncle had abused Julie, using her father's death to get close to her. The mother knew and demanded silence, so Julie sought help from the church. But under the threat of automatic excommunication, a priest could not reveal anything from confession, not even under threat of his own death or that of others. Later, Julie came to him outside confession, trying to seduce him to get help in her own way. Mads refused carefully, and suggested she seek a professional. Frustrated and confused, she accused him of abuse. Meanwhile, the real culprit remained free. Her mother forced Julie to retract, and the accusations were withdrawn, but Julie ran away. Mads agreed to find her, because he felt he had to take responsibility for not handling the situation better. But it wasn't just that. Without Julie, it was his word against his mother's and his uncle's. He intended to bring the uncle to justice, if he could. Now that he was no longer bound by the church, nothing could stop him. Still, he was at a dead end. Maybe Jacob would have better luck. Mads gave him all the information he had. Julie's phone was prepaid, and Skov had already followed that lead. Mads hadn't heard anything from her for months, but her photo was still on his phone. Records only showed that she hadn't used the phone since March 7th. As if she had vanished that day. Her car had disappeared too. Not much to go on, but more than Mads had managed in all the time he'd been looking for her. In return, Jacob gave him the first useful clue about Julie since his arrival in Esbjerg. Legally, she had changed her name to Julie Lai. Local records were public if you knew where to look. Under that name, she had gotten into trouble, but her mother hadn't been notified, because Julie was already 18. Her release had been handled by Søren Gron, a court-appointed lawyer, and also the Aldrichsen's attorney. Jacob's warning was clear: do not interfere in the investigation and do not speak with Gron. Mads, just 24 hours from risking freedom and life, wasn't about to put himself in danger, but at least now he knew a little more. He wasn't sure if he should tell Agnete. Jacob hadn't given him confidential information, but he knew mentioning Gron could jeopardize the investigation. Agnete would talk to Caroline, and Caroline had already shown that her relationship with Jacob wasn't enough to keep secrets out of the newspapers. On the other hand, Gron was the family's lawyer. Maybe they would feel compelled to protect him, or warn him that his name was circulating. Mads knew Søren Gron spent a lot of time at Signe Kjeldsen's house. As he reviewed everything while driving home, he allowed himself to enjoy the engine of his Audi A4. "That's it, baby," he murmured, patting the dashboard. The car was intact. He felt better. On the highway, his phone rang on the seat. Without looking, he grabbed it. "Mads." "Hi." Agnete's voice sounded broken. "Where are you?" "I'm on my way to your house." "Are you okay?" "No. I'm coming." Shaken by what he had just confessed to her, Mads hung up and pressed the accelerator to the floor. Chapter 42. Secondary roads. Like the intertidal plains of Esbjerg, the secondary roads around the sandbanks of Ribe along the Wadden Sea twisted without any apparent logic, winding in and out of neighborhoods. Only 2 exits led directly to the island of Romo. Agnete, angry, took a wrong turn. It wasn't until the second curve that she realized she was being followed, though she didn't recognize the car. For her, a good vehicle descriptor was simply black or red, new or old. With a bicycle she might distinguish model and year, with cars she had no clue. After Signa's revelations, her instincts led her straight to Mads's house instead of her own. The renovation was underway, and Lucas had the key. She didn't need to worry about locking up or running into a swarm of strange men while crying like a child. Especially since Sanna wasn't there, and Caroline would show up in minutes. She didn't want more drama. Only one certainty remained: Mads always managed to make her feel better. His way of being present made everything else fade. Despite his own concerns, he seemed capable of setting aside anxiety and anger. The car following her stopped a little ahead in the tall grass, but no doors opened. Agnete, parked in Mads's yard, stayed seated and watched. Probably a reporter, she thought. Poor Mads. This was the first time she visited his house without half a dozen strange cars in the yard. Still, the car was clearly following her, trying to figure out her connection to Mads. Curious, she peered into the rearview mirror, trying to make out the driver. The sun was low, and she could barely see inside the car. When Mads's black Audi A4 appeared around the corner, he turned on the headlights, then the other car followed slowly behind him. The windows were too dark. Not normal. She managed to read the first 3 letters of the license plate before it turned the corner: MH3. A black Toyota Corolla, not new, maybe a retired police car. MH3, Agnete murmured. Mads stepped out before she could open the door. She walked toward him, tears burning her eyes. He opened his arms, and suddenly the walls Agnete had built began to crumble. Hey, he said, lifting her face. What's going on? I don't know where to start, she whispered in a voice she barely recognized as her own. He wiped her tears and, with his arms around her, led her into the house. Come inside. I've got beer, not much else, but you can tell me everything whenever you want. Agnete nodded, allowing herself for the first time to be guided. I've got good news, Mads offered, holding her gently. Maybe you should hear it first. With tears in her eyes, Agnete looked at him and knew before he spoke. Mads. Have the charges been dropped? He smiled broadly and nodded. Agnete suddenly felt the weight lift, even more so when the door closed behind him, isolating her from the rest of the world. Chapter 43. Let go of anger. According to experts, there are 3 types of anger. The first is that chronic irritation that settles into a person's personality, like those grumpy old men. The second is the kind that simmers slowly in the face of perceived injustice. The third is pure survival, fight or flight. In a murder trial, the difference between one and the other can separate manslaughter from premeditated homicide. Anger was not his ally. He took a deep breath, slowed his heartbeat, emptied his mind. Yes, she was a bitch. And an opportunist. But he didn't want her out of the way for that. He wanted her off the board because she thought she was smarter than him. Agnete ran her fingers along the mantelpiece. Dust. A thin, aged layer. The lighter gaps marked where ornaments had once stood. Now only shadows remained. Behind the grate the bricks were clean, too clean. Not a single ember. Are you renting? She asked. Mads returned to the living room with a glass of water. And why's that? She smiled sideways. Because it looks like nobody lives here. Or that you stopped doing so years ago. He raised an eyebrow. Not all the rooms are empty. He set the glass on the mantel and pulled her close. Later I could show you my postmodern bedroom. Maybe even a hands-on demonstration of my minimalist, single-purpose bed. I promise it impresses. She laughed. But the memory of her skin against his on the beach sent an electric shiver down her spine. Single-purpose. Sleeping is overrated. His lips curved slowly, dangerously. Though we talk first. Agnete's heart pounded. Talking is overrated too, she replied. Her nipples tightened under her blouse. He saw. He cursed softly. The air shifted. This time no alcohol in your mouth, no sand anywhere, he said, more seriously. I want you in my bed. Clean. Awake. And I want to show you exactly what I feel for you, Agnete. She wrapped her arms around his waist, leaning back to look at him properly. And what do you feel? There was no trace left of the former priest. Only a man with fire in his eyes. Deep blue. Without guilt. He lifted her chin gently. Tell me first what's going on with you. For a second, that should have been the important part. What had brought her here? But nothing weighed as heavily as hearing those unsaid words. She pressed closer to him. Later. For now we celebrate. Celebrate? She nodded slowly. There was no music. No soft lights. No wine in the blood. Just tension. She moved against him with a naturalness that surprised her. He responded instantly. Agnete, his voice a warning. He held her by the nape and kissed her. Soft at first. She deepened the kiss without asking. Her tongue sought his. Mads's body tensed. He broke the kiss for barely a second, forehead resting against hers. I'm not gentleman enough to resist a woman like this in my own house. I'm not in your bed yet. Yet, he repeated. He held her neck with contained firmness. No domination. No violence. Just conscious possession. His erection pressed against her through her jeans. Agnete held her breath. Desire was physical, urgent, unambiguous. He began unbuttoning her blouse. Button by button. Unhurried. Eyes locked on hers. He didn't blink. As if afraid to miss a single expression of hers. This wasn't how he had planned it. He had put the beers at the back of the fridge on purpose. He didn't want anything to cloud what he was about to say. He intended to listen. Hold her if needed. And if she didn't want to sleep with him that night, he'd embrace her and tell her he loved her. Because he did. He knew it with brutal clarity. Having her in his arms was sustenance. Something that pierced the armor he had spent years building. He turned her toward the light coming through the window. He wanted to see her. Not again in darkness, on a furtive beach. He wanted every inch in full view. Every shiver. He pressed harder against her. If you say stop, I stop. He prayed silently that she wouldn't. He'd always had a complicated relationship with prayers. But this time, he wished someone up there was on his side. He didn't want to end up alone in the shower, with the memory of her taste. Don't stop, she whispered. The moan came out low, deep. He took her hand, and led her to the bedroom. He turned on the light. Agnete swallowed. Part of her wanted him to turn it off. But she understood why he didn't. He wanted to see her. Truly. And she wasn't going to stop him. What she wanted, what she needed, was to feel him inside. To erase everything else. The earlier tears were gone. Only sensitive skin. Dry mouth. Racing pulse. She let herself fall onto the bed. He knelt before her and spread her legs with silent resolve, sliding the skirt up. A sigh escaped before he even touched her. Mads was in no hurry. It had been more than 7 years since he had desired like this. Not just the body. Everything. He wanted to savor her. Make her feel adored, not used. Chosen. When he finally mounted her again, he kissed her as if he wanted to fuse the air between them. I don't do things halfway, he murmured by her temple. She tore his shirt off urgently. He removed his jeans without taking his eyes off hers. I want to see all of you. Agnete shed her skirt. He knelt over the bed again, hard, unabashed. He touched himself openly, aware of the effect. His breathing was uneven. He leaned toward her, running fingers through her hair with minimal provocation. Enough. Then suddenly, he stopped moving. His gaze changed. I want you in my life until my last breath, he said, without irony, without playing. I want to see you before sleeping and upon waking. If you don't want the same, say it now. I'll get up, dress and take you home. The room was silent. Naked. Vulnerable. Proud. Waiting. The blue of his eyes shone under the light. The golden shadow of his beard accentuated the hardness of his jaw. He was the most beautiful man she had ever seen. And the most dangerous for her heart. She couldn't turn back, even if she wanted to. With Mads there was no shame. Only desire and a terrifying certainty. She wanted to claim him. She tilted her head back, offering herself without reserve. She barely smiled. Make love to me, Mads. Chapter 44. Cross the line. It took every ounce of willpower for Agnete to get up and leave. Mads asked her to stay. He really asked. And still she knew she couldn't. Not while Caroline was home alone. Until she had spoken to her sisters, she couldn't bring Mads there. Not like this. Stay, he insisted. And despite her protests, growing weaker by the second, he pulled her back onto the bed. They made love again before she could get dressed. You're too bad to have been a priest, she said, amused and a little proud that it was true. There was a fine line between sensual and vulgar. Crossing it didn't interest her. Brushing it, yes. With Mads, she shared that invisible boundary. She trusted him. Without reservation. He raised his hands without the slightest remorse. I wasn't always a priest, he reminded her with a wink. If you come back to bed, I can show you how unpriestly I am. He drew her toward him, but Agnete resisted, kissed him firmly and pulled away. I have to go. Then I'll go with you. There was no argument. She dressed without complaint. And she watched him, surprised at herself. That attentive demeanor which would have made her flee in other men, comforted her with him. Perhaps because he didn't play games. Because he had been clear. Because he didn't hide what he felt. And yet something still weighed on her inside. It had nothing to do with Mads. It was something else. A shadow. Signa's confession. The pending conversation with Caroline. The air was heavy, like before a storm. She smiled as he walked her to the car. Do you want me to follow? I can pick you up in the morning. No. I'll take mine. He agreed. He let her drive ahead, and followed on the empty road. The night was clear, soft. Agnete rolled the window down a little. She didn't come to a full stop at the stop signs, she slowed and kept going. The doors were locked, but the silence was unsettling. The oaks formed a dark tunnel over the asphalt, moss hanging like old curtains. Beautiful. And sad. Since Amalia Jensen's murder on the Masklande Road, more for sale signs had appeared. Real estate agents glimmered in the distance, like sad fireflies. It was strange that it all concentrated there. She had read that many serial killers live and work in the area where they hunt. That they take jobs where vulnerable people seek help. It was terrifying to think about. That the monster could be the neighbor. The man who smiled at you. She liked to believe she had good instincts. She had never felt anything dark in Mads. Not a single sign. Caroline had condemned him at first sight. Agnete hadn't. What if monsters know how to pretend better than anyone? She remembered Gaskin. His confessions, his bluster, the hearse, the private cemetery. No one had taken him seriously until it was too late. Esbjerg had spent decades shaking off that fear. And now the fear returned. But this time, the epicenter was right here. In Sonderholm. On the roads where she had played as a child. The cemetery from which Mikkel had disappeared had been a usual stop on her walks. She looked at Mads in the rearview mirror and smiled. Not even the darkest night could erase what he made her feel. She felt loved. Without him saying, I love you. Even though he had, in his own way. There was no denying it, she was in love. She had gone to him, after Signa's confession. Not to Caroline. Because she trusted him more than her own family. At the gate, Mads stayed outside as before. He waited until she entered. Then she saw her. Caroline was sitting on the last step of the porch, Balder lying at her side. The headlights lit her face. Agnete knew instantly that she knew about Jonas. Balder lifted his head as she got out of the car, wagged his tail once without rising. Signa just left, Caroline said. Nothing more. Not a word about Mads. Not a single accusation. Even though it was impossible that she hadn't seen the car. Mads's headlights slowly disappeared. The night closed in again. Agnete sat beside her sister. Did she tell you everything? Caroline took a deep breath. I hope so. We've had enough drama already, don't you think? She absent-mindedly stroked Balder. She was worried about you. A small stab of guilt pierced Agnete. She had taken refuge in Mads's arms while Caroline stayed there listening. The intertidal sea breathed fog. The water beyond the grass was a black sheet. Crickets. Frogs. A warm breeze smelling of mud and withered azaleas. Is she okay? Agnete finally asked. Sad. I suppose we all are. Poor Mom, Agnete muttered. Caroline looked at her, surprised. A tear appeared at the corner of her eye. I judged her without knowing anything, Agnete admitted. Nothing true. Caroline put her arm around Agnete's shoulders. We all did. She judged herself too. I think she punished herself to the end. Do you think she was ever happy? I don't know. She was sad even before Sammy. But she made choices. If she wasn't happy with Dad, she could have left. It's easy to say now. She's gone. Yes. And we all pay the consequences. Dad was complicated. I would have said Mom too, Agnete muttered. Caroline shook her head slowly. It's not the same, not feeling versus choosing not to feel. Mom medicated herself to avoid feeling. That's different. Thinking of Fredja as cold was easier. Thinking of her as a broken woman hurt more. Sitting there shoulder to shoulder, Agnete realized something. Their mother had forced them to return because she knew they needed each other. Far more than they admitted. Maybe it was time to stop running. Sometimes I worry I'm like Dad, Agnete confessed. I don't feel things like you or Sanna. Caroline let out a short laugh. Agnete, you can be many things. But insensitive isn't one of them. If you look up fireworks in the dictionary, your picture comes up. Oh really? When did you become a psychologist? The same day I became a mother. They laughed softly. Have you called Sanna? Agnete asked. I was waiting for you to come back. Tears filled Agnete's eyes. You could have called. Caroline shrugged. Signa was here all night. And besides, I was preparing for another one of your talks about how badly I do, as a mother. Agnete laughed, grateful for the reprieve. No wonder Jonas hasn't come, Caroline said after a moment. Poor kid. Too spoiled, Agnete replied. Mom and Signa adored him. He was the only man in a house full of women. He did well. Silence returned. The breeze tangled their hair. The azaleas needed pruning. Fredja used to take care of them alone. Agnete decided she would learn. I saw the workers today, Caroline said after a while. Thanks for getting it started. She sounded sincere. You're welcome. And so they stayed. Arms intertwined. Listening to Balder's calm breathing. For the first time in a long time, not as rivals, but as sisters. Chapter 45. The Lost Will. Signa realized she had forgotten to lock the door only when the key was already in the lock. She shook her head, turned the knob and pushed the door open. The living room was spotless. Exactly as she had left it. Lately she had too much free time, and she filled it by cleaning endlessly, organizing drawers, throwing things away. A silent obsession with keeping everything under control, while everything else fell apart. Good thing Mill was there. At least she had someone to feed, someone to brush. Otherwise, she would feel completely useless. Now she understood the empty nest syndrome. The day the cat died, better not think about it. She locked the door and went straight to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of tap water. Many people liked the island's water. She drank standing up, looking at the salt grasses of the beach through the window. What a quiet night. And she had just stirred everything up. But she didn't regret it. It was time to get rid of the bad energy once and for all. Even if some things weren't meant to see the light. Those she would take to the grave. She thought of Soren. If he had come by and not found her, maybe he'd have tried the main house. Although, with everything going on, he probably assumed it was the last place she'd be. He knew she'd been wanting to tell the truth to the girls for some time. He didn't think it was a good idea. Signe didn't care. It was the right thing to do. Fredja and Soren could think whatever they wanted. And if Soren truly loved her, he would have to accept her as she was. It was too late to call him. She would do it in the morning. She would also call Sanna. Sanna deserved to hear it from her. She sighed, set the glass on the counter, and went to the bedroom. The black silhouette of Mill leapt from the bathroom sink when she passed, and meowed in protest at her absence. As always, she followed her down the hall, ready to settle at the foot of the bed. The old chalet was small, almost like a shoebox. But it was hers. The bedroom at the back also faced the intertidal sea. She loved lying down and watching the grasses sway in the breeze while she read. She turned on the bedside lamp and sat to take off her shoes. On the table rested her current read, Veien til tilgivelse, The Road to Forgiveness. Read a full page tonight? She doubted it. But a habit was a habit. She tossed a shoe to the floor. Fredja, she murmured. What a way to leave me alone with all this mess. The house didn't answer. She hadn't expected it to. She was superstitious, yes, but not naive. If something stayed anchored to the earth, it wasn't the good things. And Fredja wasn't malicious. Though thinking about it, maybe you can't leave just yet. You left quite the mess. She smiled faintly. She had been part of that mess too. Perhaps they would end up wandering the old farm together, two stubborn ghosts. The only one who would come back out of sheer character was Frank. Selfish. Manipulative. Cruel. There was nothing good to say about him. And though she wasn't very Christian, Signe was glad he was dead. It hurt that Jonas had inherited the Strandgate house. That place dragged bad karma. Fredja might have thought she was doing her a favor, but Signe didn't see it that way. She would have preferred it stayed at the Mando Island house, the one Kirstine sold her. More space. More privacy. Even if it was a little far. They're going to make a movie about us, she said to Mill, reaching out to pet her. The cat answered with a solemn meow, and pulled her paw away as if correcting her. And what would you know? But deep down she thought cats knew more than they let on. They see things humans don't. She got up, put on her nightgown and got into bed. Mill watched her with those black attentive eyes, making sure they were alone. Signe looked into the darkness, and thought of the bottle tree in the garden. If anyone had bothered to empty the bottles, they would have discovered her secrets years ago. She wrote her fears, put them in the bottles, and left them there, giving them to God. As if the glass could trap bad luck. Some said you had to seal them, and throw them into the sea for it to really work. Maybe she would do it someday. Of all the rituals her grandmother practiced, she had only tried one, the separation spell. Maybe it was over the top, but if it all was true, she had put black dog hair from Balder and black cat hair, she looked at Mill, into a bottle with the names Agnete and Jonas. She didn't want them to hate each other. But it was better than a brother and sister, unknowingly ending up married. Fredja had made her promise never to tell. I'm sorry, Fredja, she whispered. She picked up the book from the bedside table. Underneath was a folded sheet. She frowned. She didn't remember leaving anything there. She moved the book and unfolded the paper. She read, "I, Fredja W. Aldrichsen of Esbjerg, declare this my first handwritten will and testament, dated the 2nd of April, 2025. Her heart skipped a beat. The lost handwritten will. The very one Sanna had hinted she was hiding. She kept reading, holding her breath. Item 1. Section V of my previous will is hereby completely revoked. Item 2. The new Section V shall be as follows." Her fingers began to tremble. "I hereby desire and order that the property bordering the Ribbe sandbanks, from the shortcut to the Blavend coastal road, including the original areas of Sonderholm Farm and its intertidal plains, be donated to the municipality of Esbjerg." Signa brought her hand to her chest. Fredja had donated the estate. Her house. Everything. There was her signature. Clear. Unmistakable. Why? And more importantly, what was this document doing on her bedside table? She had never seen it. She wasn't even sure it existed, until Sanna mentioned it. Who had put it there? At the foot of the bed, Mill watched her in silence, with those wise eyes that seemed to know too much. With trembling hands, Signa carefully folded the paper, slipped it inside the book and snapped it shut. She set the volume on the bedside table. Her heart throbbed with a dull ache. She turned off the light and stared into the darkness. Chapter 46. The constant noise. The noise in his head was growing. Like the croak of frogs in heat, a constant sticky screech that drowned out any rational thought. He couldn't shut it off. He didn't want to. More than 30 windows in a 500 square meter house. The odds were in his favor, at least one had to be open. Finding her bedroom was easy. Only 3 rooms upstairs. And hers to his luck, with the door slightly ajar. The floor creaked faintly as he stepped inside. Killing the dog would be a mistake. Too much noise. Too much alert. Fortunately, the animal was locked in the sister's room, asleep against the door. He could hear the rough brush of its fur against the wood each time it moved. But here in this room, she slept. She slept with the calm of someone who believes herself safe. Mouth slightly open. Breathing steady. The moon painted her face in silver. Innocent. No, he thought. Not innocent. And not too clever either. He wanted her to feel fear. Not now. Later. He wanted her to understand that she had no control. That even when she believed herself alone, when she felt in command of her decisions, there was something, someone, suspended above her, like a patient hand waiting for the right moment to close. He stayed in the shadows at the foot of the bed, watching her. The bedside clock read 2:06. The hour when, according to some, the veil between this world and the next grows thinner. He had always thought it was a good time to work. Souls are soft at that hour, he told himself. More exposed. He brushed the tip of the knife with his thumb, hidden beneath his nail. Pressed the blade against the sensitive skin, just enough to feel the edge. A shiver ran through him. He didn't move. Not yet. First he had to understand. He waited a few more seconds, making sure her sleep wasn't fake, that there was no tension in her eyelids, no alertness in her breathing. Nothing. He slid to the side of the bed. With a precise gesture he left the gift. Then he withdrew as he had entered, swallowed by the darkness, while the noise in his skull kept growing, satisfied. Chapter 47. I was exhausted. Hey, sleepyhead. Caroline's voice came with a small hop onto the mattress. Agnete opened one eye. Her sister was already dressed for work. A glance at the clock fully cleared the sleep from her mind. She was late. I overslept too, Caroline said. Yesterday left me drained. I didn't want you waking up alone with the workers downstairs. Reality hit Agnete like a wave. Oh my God. I completely forgot. Are they already here? Caroline nodded. Yes. And to be honest, they seem to know exactly what they're doing without me sticking my nose in. I was going to stay until you woke up, but I have a meeting in 40 minutes. Agnete sat up, still dazed. 2 days in a row sleeping as if the world didn't exist. What's happening to me? Am I running away, or just exhausted? She searched for her clothes, promising herself she would wash them today. She looked at Caroline. They were almost the same size. Maybe she could borrow something. Thanks. Really? I don't know what's wrong with me. Drama, Caroline replied, stretching the word with a knowing smile. Agnete couldn't help but laugh. Do you need anything before I go? Her sister asked from the doorway. No, I'm fine. I'll go out to eat. Eating meant Mads. And just thinking about it made her chest loosen. Okay. I'm off. Caroline's heels clicked across the hallway wood, then the muted sound of the car starting came from outside. Silence. Agnete tied her hair back with her hand, and reached toward the bedside table for the hair tie she had left there the night before. She froze. There, resting on the wood, was a small yellow paper umbrella. She picked it up slowly, turning it between her fingers. It was identical to the one Mads had kept in his pocket the night before. Identical. But she didn't remember him giving it back, or bringing it home. And certainly, she didn't remember leaving it on the bedside table. A slight chill ran down her spine. Where did it come from? Sammy's photograph. Nielsen's song. Now this. Too many coincidences. Outside, Caroline's blue Volvo V90 drove away for good. Agnete looked at the bed. Her sister had been sitting far from the bedside table. She couldn't have left it there. And even if she could, why would she? She fixed her gaze on the little ornament. It's just a paper umbrella, she told herself. Nothing more. What scares isn't the object, it's what it carries. Memories. Associations. And this morning, she didn't want that. She wanted to feel something else about Fredja. About the house. She wanted to stop seeing the past as an open wound. It's time to let go, she thought. Her mother had been human. Imperfect. Like everyone. Like herself. Agnete had made enough mistakes to know it. And what could no longer be fixed didn't deserve to keep dictating the present. If I can forgive strangers for mistakes they may not even have made, why can't I forgive her? With that thought she breathed deeply. And tossed the umbrella into the trash by the dresser. Chapter 48. Numbness. It was daytime. Again. Or so he thought. His arms ached so much he could barely feel them. The numbness had made them feel foreign, as if they didn't belong to him. Just like his tongue, heavy, useless inside his dry mouth. The man hadn't returned. And yet, Mikkel knew with a strange new clarity, he would die before anyone found him. And in accepting that, the fear had vanished. His eyes burned. His lips were cracked. He was so weak he didn't even move when he saw the lion's mane jellyfish glide out of the locker room. He stayed still. The creature moved into the cavernous, winding, silent space. Mikkel could barely breathe, the air stung his nostrils. Yet his heart raced, irregular and painful, as if trying to escape his chest. He had felt this before in that place. The mind controls the body, his father had told him. He didn't remember why his father said it. Just the phrase. He squinted. The jellyfish paused and seemed to examine him, as if sensing his presence in the shadows. Don't breathe. Don't move. He knew jellyfish could sense cold. Playing dead wasn't exactly a brilliant strategy. Still, he forced himself to remain motionless. Not blinking. His chest rose and fell too quickly. After what felt like endless seconds, the jellyfish slid to a corner behind his head and coiled around a pile of firewood. A shaft of sunlight came through the broken window, illuminating its dark body. From the floor, Mikkel could see it clearly. Broad, black wedge-shaped head. Its belly still showed faint horizontal bands. The back nearly completely dark. Old, he thought. Its tail no longer had the yellow tip. But when it opened its mouth and revealed the white interior, he knew for certain. A mouth that delivers crippling pain. It settled on the firewood and lifted its head toward him, baring its fangs. Not more than a meter away. Close enough for Mikkel to make out the wet gleam of venom. If you can see the teeth, you're too close. His father had said that too. But he had nowhere to go. He didn't speak aloud. Only in his mind. I won't hurt you. Calm down. The jellyfish moved a tentacle, stretched its neck, opened its white mouth wider. As if responding. Outside, the sky darkened abruptly. Thunder rolled low and near. The light shifted, and both were cast into shadow. Mikkel closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered another cotton-white mouth, approaching the fishing boat. They swam with their heads above water, their bodies almost invisible over the dark sandbank. His father had said they were curious. In a documentary, he had heard they were aggressive. Who was right? He opened his eyes with effort. The world blurred. His body begged him to give in. After a while, the jellyfish closed its mouth. Mikkel exhaled slowly. And somewhere in the hazy corner of his mind, he thought he heard a voice, unsure if it was his own or the creature's. Don't worry, Mikkel. I won't hurt you. For the first time in hours or days, his heart slowed a little. Chapter 49. Footprints in the mud. Storm clouds moved low and heavy. The crew had barely started when they had to pack up in a hurry, promising to return in the morning. Agnete stayed on the porch, watching the last of Lucas's men pass through the gate. They had forecast light rain. Lies. The clouds' bellies were dark, swollen with rage. The wind picked up, and even in the tidal flats, little white crests formed. She could have felt frustrated. But she didn't. All she wanted was to see Mads. And the storm gave her the perfect excuse to go out if he was free. She knew that despite Jakob's warnings, Mads wouldn't abandon the search for Julie entirely. He wasn't running like before, that was true. He had promised to cooperate with the police. And after the charges were dropped, he wasn't about to risk going back to a cell. Not now. But she also knew he felt responsible. And that kind of guilt doesn't vanish with a signature. She leaned on the railing, looking over the salt meadows. The boathouse door seemed open. The wind made it slam violently. If no one was going to close it, it would be another repair. Or maybe it already was. She was about to go down when her phone vibrated in her back pocket. Caroline's jeans were a little tight on her. She had borrowed a pair of jeans and a soft cotton blouse. Not in the mood for ceremony. Unknown number. She hesitated. Answered. Hello. Hi. Bjørn Bissett. Ah. Hello. I followed the lead you gave me. Thanks for that, by the way. His tone was sincere. Agnete kept watching the boathouse door swing. And? Did you find anything? Not exactly what you were looking for. Julie never applied for a job at the Dagbladet. But my contact in the police gave me something interesting. It seems she legally changed her name. And they've issued a search order for her car. Agnete's heart skipped a beat. Mads would be glad. At least the police were moving. That's a good sign, right? Could be. The curious thing is that the vehicle is registered under a name you might recognize. Agnete frowned. Oh, really? A calculated pause. It irritated her. Soren Gron, he finally said. The world fell silent for a second. What? She whispered. It's a Toyota Corolla. License plate, MH33221. A shiver ran down her spine. Repeat that. MH 33221. The car that had followed her the night before was a black Toyota Corolla Cross. And the plate started with MH3. Julie wasn't behind the wheel. Soren Gron. No. It couldn't be. The car was auctioned just over a year ago, Jan continued. Gron often buys and donates vehicles. Donate? Yes. He was Julie's court-appointed lawyer. He works a lot with organizations for abused women. Sometimes he buys cars and gives them away. This time, however, it seems the title is still in his name. Agnete swallowed. Is it public? Not yet. I'd prefer to release it myself when the time comes. Understood. Your sister would probably appreciate it if you kept quiet. Caroline. Of course. I won't say anything. And there's more. Gron was also Karen Hoff's court-appointed lawyer. The wind struck harder. Karen Hock. Nana's mother. Her husband was violent. She was trying to get full custody before disappearing. Her pulse hammered in her temples. Thank you, Björn. She hung up. She kept staring at the boathouse door banging against the post, but no longer saw it. Soren knew them all. Julie. Karen. Also Amalia. Her mind began fitting pieces she didn't want to touch. The night they found the body at Back Creek, someone had entered her mother's office. Nothing stolen. Just a broken window. Papers untouched. As if they were looking for something specific. The handwritten will. If Soren knew it existed, was he looking for it? And then her own office ransacked on the day of the will reading. The intruder. The bat. Soren nearly dead. It made no sense. Or did it? If he knew about the handwritten will, why didn't Signe say anything? Signe couldn't lie. She couldn't keep secrets. Also, Agnete had believed until yesterday. But Signe seemed to want to tell the truth. About Jonas. About the paternity. She only stayed silent because Fredja demanded it. Agnete pressed her lips together. Believing hurts less than suspecting. And yet something didn't fit. Soren never mentioned Julie publicly. Nor Karen. While Caroline destroyed Mads's reputation on TV, he stayed silent. Too much silence. Officially, the only confirmed victims were Amalia Jensen and Clara Preist. And now Pia Backer. Did Soren also know Amalia? She didn't know. But she had to tell Jakob. And Mads. The wind yanked the boathouse door violently once more. Agnete went down the path toward the pier, her heart racing. If the past was about to explode, she preferred to be standing when it did. Chapter 50. Mollebugten. Mollebugten was an hour and a half from Esbjerg. Too far for someone who, officially, wasn't allowed to leave the city. So Mads did the only thing he could, he dialed a number. He stepped out onto the terrace, rested his forearms on the railing, and called Julie's mother. The conversation was brief. Direct. Straight to the point. It still hurt him to accept that this woman refused to report her own son. To incriminate him. To break completely. Even so, he told her everything Jakob Skov had shared with him. He trusted that the detective hadn't revealed anything that wouldn't soon be known. By now, Julie had been missing too long. Any news, even bitter, was better than the void. He owed her that. He hung up with a weight on his chest. Failure. He had been searching for Julie for weeks. Yet every day it seemed more likely that no one would ever know what had happened to her. Another missing person. A name dissolving into statistics. There was no proof linking her to the murders. No physical evidence. Just that photograph she had sent him from the ruins. An image placing her there, yes, but not enough for the police to declare her a victim of a serial killer. Pia Backer had been attacked. Caroline too. Proof? None. Suspicion? Barely. At least Skov was starting to believe him. After their last argument, Mads knew the detective would follow every lead. Politi Sid was now working with the National Unit for Special Crime, NSK. They had a wider view. More resources. More eyes. He had instinct. And guilt. He wanted to find Julie, yes. But he wasn't willing to face Skov or the Esbjerg department again. A few weeks in jail had been enough. His damn sense of duty had landed him there once. He wouldn't go back. For the second time in his life he could admit it, he was scared. And then there was Mikkel. The boy had been missing for 4 days. 5. No trace. No witnesses. Nothing. The odds were not good. And it twisted his stomach. He thought of Agnete. How close she was to that family. How she would carry every passing minute. It wasn't the first time everything seemed to revolve around the Aldrichsens. They were the invisible axis of all this. Whether they knew it or not. He had told Jakob. Despite Caroline. Despite Agnete. Whatever comes, the guilty will pay. He thought it without drama. Like a dry promise. Over the coastal heath, clouds closed in, turning the water a metallic grey. The wind whipped the salty grass. The storm brought a reprieve from the brutal July heat. He drew a deep breath. He wondered what Agnete was doing at that moment. The night before had been intense. Too much. He had felt her get under his skin, beyond desire. Beyond the body. He had given her space. Because he loved her. And loving also means knowing when to step back. But a message wasn't intrusion. He unlocked his phone. His finger hesitated for a fraction of a second, over her name. Don't lose her out of fear, he told himself. And he pressed send. Chapter 51. Under the rain. Grey with age but solid, the Aldrichsen dock stretched more than 400 meters into the salty Wadden Sea, reaching deep waters. More elaborate than most, with space for 3 large ocean-going vessels. Only one mooring was empty. Her father had built it in harmony with the traditional Wadden Sea houses. Even the small metal roof, shaped like a tower, mirrored the balcony's belfry. At the far end, the shed door banged again and again, drunkenly on its hinge. Agnete walked the wooden walkway with purpose. Secure the door. Then she would head to the center to see Jakob. She knew Soren Gron's connection to Julie wasn't new to the police, Bjarne had made that clear, but the license plate, that license plate felt like a key piece. MH3. Too much of a coincidence. She thought of Signa. Of everything she had endured. The idea of telling her churned her stomach. The wind whipped her hair across her face and mouth. The coastal brackish water splashed her bare arms. She inhaled the thick, earthy scent of the marsh and quickened her pace. The sky darkened to a heavy purple hue. In the distance, other boats sought shelter. When she reached the shed, she peered inside. It smelled of old wood and salt. Of work well done. Jonas had always been the one to care for the boats. Agnete had even considered giving them all to him. In truth, they belonged to her as much as to them. That her mother hadn't included them in the will now seemed a minor detail. One of the boats, a 7-meter Nimbus, had belonged to their grandfather. She didn't remember the last time it had sailed. If they stayed there, they would rot. Maybe Jonas deserved more than resentment. She thought of the Strandgate house. None of them had returned there in years. It hadn't been a conscious decision, they had simply stopped looking toward that side of the family. And now, with the truth on the table, she understood better why her mother had left that house to Jonas. Despite the rift between them, maybe he had lost more than they imagined. Inside the shed, everything seemed in order, except the smallest boat, a light skiff, wasn't on its rack. She frowned. She went back to the door. The latch was broken, though still hanging. Great, she muttered. Another problem. And the police had more urgent things to worry about. Like Mikkel. The door wasn't completely torn off. She went through the shed, closing windows to block the wind. Then, fighting the gusts, she managed to fit the door back in place. She removed her hair tie and used it to temporarily secure the latch. Not foolproof, but at least it wouldn't fly open and hurt someone. Tomorrow she would call Lucas. Her phone vibrated just as she finished adjusting the makeshift fix, but she didn't check it until she was done. It was Mads. "I love your taste." Her heart skipped a soft warm beat. She smiled without meaning to. Pride and tenderness mixed. Last night came back to her skin like an electric memory. It wasn't just desire. It was something deeper, more dangerous. She dialed his number instantly. Voicemail. She was about to send him a message when the first raindrops hit her head and the screen. She slipped the phone into her pocket just as the rain began to fall in earnest. The storm was already upon them. Chapter 52. The Tombstone. The tombstone hadn't been there last Monday, when Signe came to chat for a while. A weekly visit to the cemetery was usually enough. Not today. Today she needed advice. And as always, she brought it to Fredja. Only now she stood before a 2-meter granite pillar freshly placed, cold and proud. They had installed it without ceremony, without family, without a word. Someone from the funeral home had left it and gone. Not even Signe had known they were putting it up. Of all the cemeteries in Esbjerg, the White Lutheran churchyard was the most celebrated. Alongside the intertidal plains of Esbjerg, beneath ancient cedars, magnolias and twisted oaks, rested the city's old elite. Among the dark green foliage peaked myrtles and shrubs, here and there spiny yuccas and cacti planted to keep spirits in place. Not everyone knew this custom. Signe did. It came from her Gullah roots. In fact, she herself had planted a yucca on Frank's grave. Because Frank had been a damnable one. She hugged herself. She should have brought a sweater. A rare cold current swept down with the wind and made her skin prickle. She had promised Kirstine to help take things out of the Simonson house, but she wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. She still had to speak. Fredja's tombstone was a return to the past. Signe knew Fredja had needed special permission to erect that pillar. The old graves were rough under the fingers. First came the simple stones cut from grey granite, no adornment beyond a name and 2 dates. Then polished granite, machine-engraved, uniform, practical with no excess. Fredja's was granite, yes, but taller than almost all the modern ones. It rose like a matriarch, presiding over the family plot. Frank's barely protruded like a pillow over the earth. Sammy's was a small, beautiful cross. Fredja's dominated. Even in death, Signe thought, you're still bigger than life. She clutched her red bag in her hands. Fredja. I found a handwritten testamentary note. Did you put it there, old friend? Silence. Only the wind whining through the treetops. Tell me what to do. Do you really want me to give up my house after all these years? The sky darkened slowly. Signe frowned. She didn't like that feeling, a knot under her sternum she couldn't name. I wish you were here, she murmured. I have a terrible feeling, Fredja. The yucca she had planted after Sammy's death shook violently. A chill ran down her spine. In all the years she had been talking to these graves, she had never felt that someone was listening on the other side. Today she did. You are not alone. And it was no comfort. She held her gaze a second longer on the trembling yucca. Then courage abandoned her all at once. She turned and walked quickly toward the car, as if the wind might catch her. Chapter 53. The storm. They were in the middle of the tidal season, but this tide had no name. It had surged suddenly, taking over the bay like an irritated spirit. If it weren't for the threat of dumping an entire belly of rain onto the high tide, and after last month's historic floods, it might have been a relief from the sticky heat. But no one was in the mood for more water. Not when the city was still under a darker storm, the unsolved murders. Caroline sat at her desk, listening as Bjørn Bisset laid out the information he had gathered. Clues that, apparently, her own sister had tipped him off about. Agnete. Of course. Every time Caroline thought they were making progress, Agnete found a way to tighten the rope between them. And Jakob, he was caught in the middle too. He had shared data with Bjørn without telling her. Though both had agreed not to invade each other's professional territory, this was no longer just work. It was personal. Still, she felt the urge to protect him. "Have you confirmed the official version with the police's public information?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral.
"Of course," Bjørn replied.
Robert Bond, the director, finally spoke up. He had been listening in silence. "Caroline, I've verified everything. It's correct." She held his gaze. "Professional. Impeccable."
"Then why are you bringing it to me?"
"You have my support, Robert. If you think we should publish it, go ahead. If Søren Gron is a person of interest, and the police don't object to us mentioning him, I won't let my feelings interfere." Robert nodded, satisfied. Bjørn gathered his papers, but Caroline raised a finger. Søren Gron was listed as the registered owner of the car in Julie Lei's name. The insurance policy had been cancelled for non-payment. No one had seen the girl since April. Her prepaid phone was still active with credit. No calls since March 5th. The voicemail was full. Could Jakob access those messages? Surely. Should she ask him? No way. If he knew something, he wouldn't tell her. Not if it risked the investigation, which was already taking its toll on their relationship. Since they found Pier's body, they had barely seen each other. She knew Jakob was obsessed with catching the killer. And she wanted him to.
But she also had a responsibility to tell the truth.
"Does any other outlet have this information?" she asked. The knot in her stomach tightened. She had known Søren Gron all her life. She had spent entire Saturdays in her mother's office. He would stay for pancake breakfasts. And now he seemed involved with Signa. Poor Signa. The only truly innocent one in all this.
"No," Bjørn said.
"Are they going to arrest him?" "They've only interrogated him." Dagbladet couldn't afford to lose another scoop. Fredja wouldn't have hesitated. Their mother would have sacrificed anyone, even her daughters, if they crossed the line. The city always came first. This wasn't the first time Caroline had faced a decision like this. But it was the hardest. If Søren was innocent, this could ruin his life. And Signa's. She pushed the papers away as if they burned her. Publish it. Front page. The headache hit instantly. She rubbed her temples. As soon as Robert and Bjørn left, her new assistant peeked in. "Line 2. It's your sister." Perfect, she thought, exhausted. She picked up. "What is it, Agnete?" "It's Sanna." "Caroline, what happened?" Caroline exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Sanna," she murmured, with a relief she hadn't expected to feel. She stood, closed the office door and sat back down. And she began to tell everything. Chapter 54. 2:46 p.m. The Tempest. Agnete hated crossing bridges in a storm like this. The wind shook the car as if it wanted to rip it off the asphalt, and the windshield wipers could barely cut through the curtain of water. She left her phone inside her bag. Not now. All her attention had to be on the road. She was soaked. She hadn't wasted time looking for an umbrella. This was more urgent than her discomfort. She drove straight to the Esbjerg police station. If Jakob wasn't there, she would speak to whoever she needed to. She couldn't stay still. Not after what she had seen. Fortunately, Jakob was in his office. He had dark circles under his eyes, his beard darker than usual, the tense expression of someone running on too many sleepless nights. He greeted her with a brief, tired smile.
Should I be happy or worried to see you?
Agnete crossed her arms. Cold. Wet. And for the first time in a long while, uncertain. A little of both. He led her down the hallway to his office. Agnete noticed the glances. She hadn't turned on the news all day, but she knew the broadcasters would be relishing the story of her relationship with Mads. Perfect. More fuel to the fire. Jakob didn't bring it up. In his office, he took a jacket from the coat rack and handed it to her. That simple gesture disarmed her more than any reproach could. Talk. Agnete wrapped herself in the garment and took a deep breath. I might have a lead. On what?
The car you're looking for.
The one Soren gave Julie. Jakob squinted. How the hell does she know, he thought. But he didn't ask. I think I saw it last night, she continued. I'm not sure of the make, but it was black. And the license plate, that I remember. Jakob ran his hand over his face.
There are thousands of black cars, Agnete.
Are you sure about the plate?
It's the only thing I'm sure of.
Silence. Then a dry whisper. Shit. He looked at her intently. Was Mads with you? Agnete lifted her chin, annoyed. Again Mads. Always Mads.
I have to ask, he added. Yes, he was with me.
She held his gaze. And while we're at it, the night they killed Clara Priest he was also with me. Jakob raised an eyebrow. And you decide to tell me now? She pressed the jacket tighter against her body. Pride and guilt battling inside. You didn't ask. And you wouldn't have believed me.
You didn't ask.
And besides, I already had an alibi you wouldn't accept. The challenge hung between them. Touché, he admitted, standing. I need you to fill out an official report. It'll only take a few minutes. Wait here. Agnete nodded. When he left, her gaze fell on the ashtray on the table. A cigarette smoked down to the filter, still smoldering. Don't tell your sister, Jakob said from the door, following her gaze. I'm trying to quit. Trying. She didn't see him light another. That drew a small, involuntary smile. I'm not the only one Caroline intimidates, she thought. And yet, none of that stopped him from caring about her. That unexpected, sharp certainty hurt a little less than the wind on the bridge. Chapter 55. Blackwater. Mikkel woke to the first crack of thunder. He blinked to clear the fog from his head but didn't look around. He didn't want to see that place again. If he didn't look, he could almost pretend it didn't exist. Outside, the rain pounded the wooden bridge and the roof in heavy, thick drops. The air was damp, dense, and yet his throat burned like paper. It smelled of water. He could feel it close. So close it hurt. Like warm bread on the other side of a closed door. He barely turned his head. The gag lay in front of him, dirty, stained with dried blood. For hours he had feared the man would come back and shove it into his mouth again.
But the man wasn't there.
Only darkness. And Mikkel no longer feared the dark. True horrors happen during the day, he thought. In the light, you see the faces. He stayed lying on the floor still, watching the rain slip through the broken window. The water ran in glistening streams, forming a puddle that grew slowly, spreading like those time-lapse nature videos he'd watched with his father. A perfect circle that got bigger, bigger. Until it started sliding along the slanted floorboards. Toward him. Something lit up in his chest. Hope. Small, frantic, like the flutter of a bird trapped between ribs. If it reaches me, just a little. I could drink. His mouth was pasty, his tongue swollen. Swallowing was a useless effort. He shifted his gaze to the corner. The lion's mane jellyfish was still there. Coiled. Vertical eyes motionless. No longer in attack position. Just waiting. Patient. Efficient. Waiting for the moment. Mikkel looked at the water again. He learned from it. From the jellyfish. Don't move. Don't waste energy. Wait. The water inched forward, centimeter by centimeter. And he waited too. Chapter 56. 5:46 p.m. The last mistake. When Agnete left the police station, Søren Gron's name was already on the radio. They had thrown it out there. No anesthesia. She thought about stopping by the Dagbladet. Facing Caroline. No. Not now. The urgent thing was Signe. If they were going to detain Søren, she wasn't going to leave her alone. Whatever happens between us, she's still family, she reminded herself. She drove to Ostershavn through relentless rain. She parked in front of the house and ran to the porch. In 10 seconds she was soaked again. Signe's Tesla was in the garage. She knocked at the door. Out of habit, she tried the handle. Unlocked. For years that house had been an extension of her own. She went in without thinking, pushing the door open. Signe. Only the patter of rain against the windows. Jacob's light jacket was dripping. Not much use in a downpour like this. She muttered a curse under her breath, took it off, and left it on a chair on the back porch. Signe. Darkness in the hallway. The bedroom empty. The house silent. She felt an uncomfortable twinge. We're not girls anymore, she told herself. She has the right to lock the door. To answer to no one. She went to the bathroom, grabbed a towel, and dried off as best she could before moving toward the kitchen. She didn't want to soak the furniture. She didn't want to invade more than she already was. Mill the cat appeared with graceful steps and a long accusing meow. Yes, I know. Agnete murmured, bending down. You remember me, right? The animal let her pet it for a second, torn between dignity and pleasure. Then it decided dignity was more important, and slinked out of the kitchen, tail held high. Agnete sighed. What if she's in the main house? She looked out at the rain. The car was there. The phone. She took out her own and called Signe. No answer. But it wasn't ringing inside. She was carrying it. That worried her more. She set the phone on the counter, grabbed a dirty glass from the sink, washed it, and poured herself some water. The domestic gesture made her feel even more like an intruder. Is she with Søren? If so, nothing she did could protect her from what was coming. And she knew it. She called again. Nothing. The rain hit the windows harder now, rigid, almost violent. Agnete rested her hands on the counter and looked outside. I'll wait a little longer, she decided. As if patience could change anything. Chapter 57. The Testament of the Storm. He wanted her to understand once and for all, they were not her friends. That was why he had left the handwritten testament note by the bed. So that when she opened her eyes, she would see it. So that she would know. But now the paper was gone. He needed it back. What if she had made a mistake with it? What if she had taken it to the police? No. No. Signe wouldn't do that. Not with him. Minutes earlier he had heard the door open, and had hidden in the bedroom. When he recognized Agnete Aldrichsen's voice, something tensed in his body and mind at the same time. Desire and rage. Always together. Always confused. Agnete. He was convinced that it would be her in the end, who would give him peace. Or something like peace. The rain poured down in sheets. The wind battered the house violently. Darkness rolled in at intervals. Agnete was in the kitchen. So close. It would be so easy. No. It was not the time. Voices began crowding his head again, overlapping, insistent. It was hard to think. Soon Signe would be back. She mustn't know he had been there. He had swapped the car with her, insisting she use his to visit her cousin. He knew she kept an extra key in the glove compartment. He needed to retrieve the testament without raising suspicion. No broken glass. No forced doors. There had already been too many surprises. The first, Fredja finding him alone in the house the day she came to talk to Signe about the New Testament. His first mistake. The second was telling her his plans for the house and property. As if he weren't part of it. As if she could set him aside. The third was fleeing. He had chased her through the forest. Lost a ridiculous shoe among the roots. He caught her. Carried her back. Threw her down the stairs. The impact still echoed in his memory. Now she was dead. Like his daughter would soon be. The thought provoked nothing. No guilt. No fear. Just a kind of inner order. But he couldn't make any more mistakes. Not now. Plans could change. Yes. But they had to be thought through. And he couldn't think. Too many voices. He closed his eyes and forced himself to fix on a single image. The boy, in the inflatable canoe. Alone. Drifting toward open water. Hands flailing clumsily. The water moving beneath him, insufficient to keep him afloat. What kind of person leaves a child like that? The kind that doesn't know how to love. And children who are not loved. They are the most dangerous of all. Chapter 58.
The house without a soul.
Where the hell was Signe? Agnete sat on the sofa, a folded towel under her bottom, resisting the urge to turn on the TV. She wanted to know if there was any news. Of course she did. But the thought of Signe walking in and finding her there, settled in and watching the news, felt almost indecent. It was already bold enough to be in her house uninvited. She stood up restless. Went to the bathroom. Turned on the tap and let the water run until it was clear, then splashed it on her face. The pipes in the small chalet were rusted. There was only one bathroom. I never understood what she sees in this place. Signe had more than enough money to move into a bright, clean house, without that bad vibe she half joked about. And yet, she clung to this house as if it were an anchor. Agnete was starting to feel hungry. She hadn't heard from Mads since that morning's message. She went back to the kitchen, grabbed her phone and returned to the sofa. She didn't want to call him. If she heard his voice, she would leave immediately to find him. With him, everything was easy. Too easy. She could get lost in his laugh, in the way he touched her, and forget the chaos.
But she owed this to Signe.
Stay. Face it. What if she's with Jonas? She typed to Jonas first. Do you know where your mother is? Then, almost without thinking, she opened the chat with Mads. I think I love you. She set the phone beside her, but it vibrated instantly. Then marry me.
Her heart jumped sharply, as if it had tripped inside her chest.
Are you serious? As serious as I can be. There was a winking emoji. She hesitated. She collapsed onto the sofa. Why? Because I kiss better than anyone else ever has? She laughed aloud.
Yes, she murmured.
She was about to write something sarcastic, when another message arrived. Because I love you, Agnete. Why else? And that sentence so pure disarmed her. Are you proposing by text? How cheesy. Seconds passed, stretching long. Have you ever seen a grown man cry? Only once. And if you said no? And immediately. Did you steal his heart too? Agnete stared at the screen. She remembered the day she left for college. When she told Jonas that, if she could avoid it, she wouldn't come back. He didn't cry. But it was the closest he came. Those blue eyes glassy. The effort to keep his composure. The proud silence. They were never the same after that. Did he ever love her? She didn't know. Maybe it was just habit. Family. Something comfortable and familiar. Now, with everything she had discovered, the idea felt murky. Still, he said he had loved her. And for years, she had settled for that. She looked at Mads' message again. He didn't hide. He didn't play half measures.
Yes, she finally typed.
Chapter 59. Under the grey sky. Spread out on the bed, the same one he had shared with Agnete, naked after his shower, Mads felt no rush to get dressed. Unless it was to go get her. He wanted her body. Like a teenager, he held the phone over his chest, rereading every message, aroused by simple words on a screen. Sex was incredible, yes.
But it wasn't just that.
He wasn't a grateful novice. Far from it. He'd had lovers since he was 11. Women came to him on their own. He quickly understood the game. He was the bad boy secretly desired. Then they married men in expensive suits, with accounts at big Copenhagen investment banks and Swiss watches, men who wanted a flawless house, 2.5 kids because it looked right in a photo. Mads was never that guy. He came from a home that was never really a home. His father wasn't a spectacular criminal. He didn't need to be. Cheap alcohol, small debts, under-the-table jobs that always ended badly were enough. He knew the wrong people, did favors no one remembered, disappeared for days with any excuse. He stole things unnecessarily, tools, fuel, anything he could quickly resell. Not from hunger, but from that mix of anger and carelessness that drags some men down without anyone pushing. The only decent thing he did was introduce him to his older brother, the son who turned out right, disciplined, methodical, quiet. Proof that disaster wasn't inevitable. His mother was there but not really. Always tired. Always justifying. Always looking away. Mads learned early that shame has a sound, the doorbell when you don't want to answer. Whispers in the supermarket. Your last name spoken with half a smile. He wanted something different. Not to become another man bragging about expensive whiskey and a German car to cover the emptiness. He didn't want to pretend. He wanted stability. He wanted to owe nothing to anyone. As a young man, he took a hard hit, one of those that leaves no visible bruise but a direction, and decided to turn sharply. Cut ties. Cut excesses. Cut impulses. He discovered desire was easier to control than fear. Discipline could replace chaos. It wasn't holiness. It was strategy. He saved. Invested wisely. Got used to routine, clear numbers, accounts without surprises. Organizing his finances was a way of organizing his identity. Money wasn't the point was never feeling small again. Now his bank account competed with men who'd had advantages from the start. And he owed nothing. To no one. But all of that stopped feeling enough the day he thought he could lose her. He wanted Agnete by his side. Not as a conquest. Not as a trophy. As home. And that, for the first time, scared him more than poverty. Since waking, at least half his thoughts revolved around making love to her. Just reading her words made him hard again. And yet, he didn't think about relieving himself. Sex without her meant nothing. He could call her. Hear her voice. But for now, the message was enough. He had seen the news. He knew that once they spoke, reality would hit with force. And soon. Too soon. For now, he wanted to say what he felt without interruption. Without noise. He typed. Yes, what? His heart pounded in his chest. She took a long time to reply. Yes. I think so. He smiled. Was that a yes, I think you broke his heart? Or a yes, I think I'm going to marry you? Provocation. Flirtation. The notification, Agnete is typing, stretched on forever. Depends. Depends on what? Another pause. Too long. On whether you plan to ask me in person. Tomorrow, he replied instantly. And he meant it. He planned to look for a ring that same afternoon. Something simple. Elegant. Like her. Within his budget, of course. Agnete's money was the only issue he still hadn't fully processed. But he would recover the deposit soon. That would help. The phone vibrated again. And what's wrong with today? Mads stared at the screen and grinned from ear to ear. What's wrong with today? Nothing. Except he wasn't going to propose by message. He would have to get up. Get dressed. Go to her. And when he had her in front of him, looking into his eyes, he would ask again. This time no screens in between. Chapter 60. The rain fell. And what's wrong with today? While waiting for the reply, Agnete rested the phone on her chest and glanced at the book on the side table. The house was almost dark. Only a blue glow, filtered through the front and back windows, tinted the walls. Outside, the rain fell in a dense curtain. The moon was barely a pale scar behind the water. I could turn on a lamp. She didn't feel like moving. She activated the phone's flashlight and directed the beam onto the book. Veien til Tilgevels. A thick self-help volume. The author's name meant nothing to her. She picked it up and brought it closer, illuminating the cover. Some of these books were a revelation. Others pure babble wrapped in promises. I hope Signe chose well. For a while she herself had devoured this kind of reading. She sought comfort, instructions, prepackaged answers. Until she realized all she really needed was to come home and face what hurt. She was making peace with Fredja. At last. Too bad Mom isn't here to see it. Or is she? Signe believed in life after death. Lately, Agnete sometimes felt a presence. A faint scent in the air. An intuition. Maybe it's not crazy. A strange calm enveloped her for a moment. She opened the book. A page was marked with a folded slip of paper. She took it out. The handwriting was neat. Firm. Visible through the thin paper. A pang of guilt. This isn't mine. Still, she unfolded it with her left hand and held the phone in her right to better illuminate it. At that moment, a message arrived. The phone vibrated in her palm. She didn't look. Her eyes were fixed on the words. At first she didn't understand them. She didn't want to understand them. But her brain did. And she knew before the fear even finished taking shape. Chapter 61. The boat adrift. I, Fredja W. Aldrichsen, of Esbjerg, declare this to be the first handwritten and signed will of my last will and testament, dated the 2nd of April 2025. Mom's will. Agnete whispered. She held her breath as her eyes scanned the page. A sharp noise echoed in the bedroom. Her dazed mind attributed it to the cat. She kept reading. I wish and order that the property bordering the sandbanks of Ribbe, from the shortcut to the Blavend coastal road, including the original lands of the Sonderholm farm and the adjacent wetlands, be donated to the municipality of Esbjerg. She froze. The book slipped onto the sofa. The paper stayed in her hand next to the phone. This wasn't just a note. It was dynamite. She headed straight to the kitchen for her bag. She had to get that document out of there. She had to show it to Caroline. Or hide it. Or she didn't know, but she couldn't leave it behind. She stopped dead. A man stood at the end of the hallway. Hooded. Dressed in black. Only his pale eyes floated in the dim light. For a second, they stared at each other. Surprise against surprise. Agnete screamed. She ran for the front door, letting the bag fall. The phone slipped from her hand as she tried to open it. She yanked the handle and burst into the rain, slamming the door behind her. She heard a curse behind her. She didn't head for the car. Even if she got inside, she didn't have the keys. She'd be trapped. She ran toward the dock. The mud gave way under her feet. The man appeared on Signe's porch, a black silhouette against the bluish wood. Agnete stuffed the will inside her shirt to protect it from the water. Thank God she wasn't wearing heels. The ground grew softer with every step. She didn't have the house keys. The building was empty. The landline was upstairs in her room. And even if she got inside, he could break a window. No one nearby would hear her scream. The dock was her only option. The lock had been broken for some time. She could get in fast. Maybe there were keys in a boat. She didn't dare look back. She knew this property better than anyone. He didn't. The mud swallowed her shoes. She lost one but kept running. She jumped onto the dock almost blindly. The wood creaked under her steps. Don't look back. Don't look. The boathouse was a black hole at the end of the dock. She ran toward it. A lightning bolt tore across the horizon. The porch lights in the distance flickered like fireflies. She tore off the makeshift latch. The door gave way with a hollow thud. Far off, she heard another curse. He had understood. Inside, one of the boathouse doors was open. A small boat already floated in the water. She decided without thinking. She jumped. She landed awkwardly, hitting her head on one bench, her ribs on another, but the boat slid out of the boathouse, carried by the current into the night. Then she realized something. The open door. The boat ready. A trap. No oars. But the tide was strong enough to carry her. Her left thigh burned. So did her chest. She tasted blood mixing with rain on her lips. Steps running along the dock. She lay still, letting the current do its work. Dark. Dressed in dark clothes. Thank God. Jeans. Plum-colored shirt. Nothing to reflect the light. The paper was stuck to her skin, soaked. Maybe ruined. I've given up asking for help to save a piece of paper, she thought with fierce clarity. Suddenly, the boat stopped abruptly. The bow sank into the mud. Another lightning bolt illuminated the tidal flats. It was stranded. Further back, at the end of the dock, a black figure. Each flash drew it in sharp relief. The thunder cracked closer each time. The channels were like tangled veins. Even at low tide, the center was deep. But oars were needed. And light. She had nothing. If he grabbed another boat, he'd catch her. The moment the figure disappeared from the dock, Agnete made her decision. She slid out of the boat and crawled toward the grassy shore, sinking into the darkness before the next lightning flash revealed her position. Chapter 62. No one escapes the sea. Mads slipped on his left boot while staring at the phone on the rumpled sheets. Answer the phone. He had texted her a while ago, but Agnete still hadn't replied. He felt stupid for being frustrated over something so trivial. He had no idea where she might be or what she was doing. Maybe she had gotten caught up in something important. Nothing strange about a delayed response. He did it all the time himself. The difference was that this time, he was about to propose. And Agnete wasn't the type to ignore an important conversation. She could tell him off, but she wouldn't just disappear. He swiped across the screen looking for a clue. The conversation had never gone this far. He called a third time. The phone rang and rang before going straight to voicemail. Damn it, Agnete, he exhaled. Pride could take a hike, this wasn't right. He checked the clock, almost 8 in the evening. The rainy season still showed no mercy, and he had to trust that she was at home. Who went out in this storm? He didn't have Agnete's sister's number. If he did, he would have called Caroline despite how he felt about her. Impatient, he typed a blunt, humorless message. Where the hell are you? He placed the phone screen up on the bed, and put on the other boot. He sat for a moment, staring at the phone, until the screen went dark. He stood up, exhaling. Shit. He stuffed the phone in his back pocket, and went straight to the kitchen for the car keys. He couldn't believe Agnete had just stopped talking to him. He grabbed his rain jacket and stepped out the front door, determined to go to Ostersund. He knew her sister probably wouldn't want him on the property, but he didn't care. Something inside him told him this gut feeling wasn't good. Chapter 63. The Mud and the Tide. Crouched low, Agnete moved through the beach grass, breathing hard, trying not to let panic take hold. Her ribs ached from the blow to her chest, but she focused entirely on the intertidal zone, dodging the mud and darkness as best she could. Only one shoe on her left foot, the right bare, carried all her weight. There was no way to know exactly what might be hidden in those sandbanks. Rumors said the mud held the bones of soldiers who had collaborated in the Second World War. Old boats, nets, broken bottles, the remains of drunken fishermen who didn't respect the place, even century-old wagon wheels preserved by the sticky clay. The water reached her ankles in some spots, and the terrain was a hell of uneven ground. She crawled through the grass, using the stalks for cover. She had never gone this far, not even as a child. She had seen fishermen with their shiny yellow boots, unfazed, but she had nothing like that. The land was hers, yes, but what had seemed like an exciting adventure quickly turned to frustration. Every step was a fight against the foamy mud. If you weren't careful, you ended up covered to the neck. The fetid paste seeped into every crevice, impossible to clean without a long, painful shower. Agnete didn't share anyone's devotion to that smell. She didn't know how far she had advanced through the grass, but she kept going until she heard nothing behind her. When she found the rotted hull of a small boat, she dove underneath to hide, stumbling over something bulky in the process. The darkness, mud, and rain merged into a labyrinth that only her instinct and fear guided her through. Chapter 64. The Closed Door. The gate to the estate was closed. It had never been a real obstacle. The Aldrichsens owned too much land to fence it all, so Mads went around the property and entered the forest. The same spot where he had found that lost shoe the day he met Agnete. Too many things had started there, he thought. He pushed aside the side barrier, and moved toward the small chalet by the coast. Agnete's car was parked out front. Another vehicle was there too. Dark. Too dark. He looked inside her car. Empty. The other one too. A flash of lightning tore across the sky, and for a second the veranda lit up like an old photograph. The wind shook the bottles from the little bottle tree, making them clink against each other in a disturbing rhythm. The front door was open. Caution whispered that he should wait. Call. Not go in alone. He entered. Inside, thick darkness reigned. As he stepped forward, he kicked something on the floor. The object lit up as it activated. He crouched. Agnete's phone. He held it for a moment between his fingers, as if it burned. He turned on the screen. The messaging app was still open. The last message was his. I love the taste you have. His chest tightened.
Where are you, Agnete? He murmured, not realizing he had spoken out loud.
Something had interrupted her. Something urgent enough to make her drop the phone and leave the door open. He peeked into the kitchen. A black shape crouched on the counter. The cat. Its eyes flashed for a second in the dim light. Nothing else. Agnete, he called louder. Silence. The house was small. There weren't many places to hide. Still, he checked the bedroom. Empty. He stepped back onto the porch. A cold, heavy feeling began to settle in his stomach. Not again. The wind whipped against his face. The storm was overhead. The bottles clashed harder now, as if someone were shaking them in anger. He started toward the main house, under the rain that was intensifying. Agnete, he shouted, louder this time. The name was lost in the wind. And as he moved, a dark, stubborn thought began to take hold. If something had happened to her, if someone had touched in Aldrichsen again. This time, he wasn't going to hold back. Chapter 65. The Abandoned Pier. Agnete trembled beneath the rotting hull of the old boat. Inside it smelled of mold, wet wood, and something denser, sweeter, nauseating. She was sitting in thick mud, soaked to the bone. Her hair clung to her face and neck, hardened by the mixture of rain and dirt. She didn't dare move. The rain pounded on the hull from outside, and seeped through the cracks in the decayed wood. One persistent drop slid down her back. Another struck the crown of her head. Each contact made her feel exposed. Traceable. Vulnerable. Who was he? Why was he in Signa's house? Where was Signa? And why wasn't she answering her phone? Her heart hammered so hard she feared it could be heard from outside. What if Caroline had already come back? What if she saw her car in the driveway? What if that man was after her? The thought alone brought a pang of guilt. I'm a coward. She was paralyzed. She had always believed that, when the moment came, she would be brave. That she would know how to act. But now fear had her from the inside, immobilizing her. She swallowed salty tears and pressed her fist to her mouth to stifle a sob. Think. She couldn't. A flash of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the inside of the hull for a second. It was only the skeleton of an abandoned boat, in the tidal zone. Some fisherman had probably left it there after it ran aground, too much work to recover. It looked as if it had been rotting for years. Another flash. And then she saw it. Something red outside next to the hull. A bag. It must have been dragged in, without her noticing when she got inside. Shivering, she didn't know from cold or terror, she stretched out a hand and grabbed the strap. She pulled hard. The bag resisted, trapped in the mud. She pulled again, almost banging her head on the wood. Suddenly it gave way. And something else came with it. Another flash of white light. A small hand. Decomposed. Agnete screamed. The sound escaped before she could stop it. She covered her mouth with her hand, pushed the bag away from her, and stumbled out from under the boat. The rain hit her full force. As she got to her feet, her knees sank into the mud. She felt other solid forms under her hands and legs. Irregular. Too familiar. No. No, don't look. Her mind refused to name them. But they were there. Around her. Touching her. She stood still under the storm, the mud swallowing her feet. Then she heard it. Her name. Far away. Carried by the wind. Agnete. The world shrank to that sound. Mads. Relief and horror collided inside her. She wanted to run toward that voice. She wanted to warn him not to come closer. She wanted to not be there. She opened her mouth, this time to answer. And fear tightened her throat again. Chapter 66. Everything returns with the tide. Agnete. Mads shouted again. She wasn't in the house. All the doors were locked. The rain pounded, and the wind pushed the shadows against the walls. He ran toward the dock. Agnete. The shed door hung crooked, half collapsed over the water. Inside, one of the moorings was empty. One less boat. He forced himself to think. No. She wouldn't have gone out in this weather. Impossible. He backed up and moved to the end of the pier, which stretched further into the water than the shed. From there he could see nothing. The sky was a black mass, the moon erased by the curtain of rain. Agnete. Then he heard it. A scream. Distant. Broken. The sound emptied his lungs. Terror. Without thinking, he ran toward the voice. Agnete. The rain slammed into his face, the mud slowed his steps, but he kept going, guided only by that thread of desperation. Agnete no longer thought. Panic had claimed her completely. She had heard Mads. That meant she wasn't alone. That maybe she would get out of there alive. But what she had seen, that would never go away. She let out sobs she didn't recognize as her own while dragging herself through the mud, pushing obstacles aside with her hands, refusing to look, moving toward the voice calling her. Mads, she screamed, her throat raw. She followed the sound like someone following a rope in the dark. Finally, the mud gave way beneath her knees, and she felt firmer ground. She lifted her head. A lightning flash lit the world. And there he was. His face tense, soaked, eyes searching for her with a mix of fear and fury. Her body gave out. She collapsed on herself, curled into a fetal position, unable to bear the weight of what she had just seen. She cried without restraint, under the rain that pounded her as if it wanted to erase everything. Suddenly Mads' body covered hers. He lifted her effortlessly, as if she were the only thing that mattered in the middle of the chaos. She clung to him with a desperation that stung his pride, but he didn't care. She needed an anchor. And he was the only solid thing in the middle of the storm. Chapter 67. Where the Dead Hide. The emergency room at Central Hospital was packed, but as soon as they saw Agnete, they moved her through without waiting. She trembled uncontrollably. In shock, they laid her on a stretcher and began examining her injuries. Mads didn't leave her side for a second. She couldn't stop crying. There were bones everywhere, she repeated between sobs. In the mud, all over. They administered a sedative. The police were notified. Mads called Jakobskov. This time he was grateful for the direct number. Jakob arrived from the Esbjerg police station in record time. There were bones, Agnete insisted. Everywhere, they were touching me, there was a hand, Jakob. And she broke down again. Jakob placed a hand on her shoulder. His face was tense. Professional, yes, but not immune. This hit him for more reasons than the obvious ones. Agnete, he said, firm and gentle at the same time, tell me again what you were doing on the sandbanks. The sedative was starting to take effect. Her eyes blurred. Still, she grabbed Jakob's hand. I told you. There was a man at Signa's house. He chased me. I fell into the boat. She searched for Mads with her eyes. He understood what she was asking. He leaned closer. The connection between them was palpable. Beyond fear, beyond chaos. And that trust pierced his chest. You fell? Jakob asked. I jumped, she corrected, wiping her nose on Mads' shirt sleeve. To him, it was an intimate gesture. Human. He didn't care at all. I didn't know where to go. She has bruising on her chest, the nurse reported. We'll take her for x-rays to rule out fractures. Mads squeezed Agnete's hand. He didn't speak. He let her answer. He knew what she said now could be crucial. He carefully moved the mud-caked hair from her face. She had a cut on her head. Blood mixed with mud on her cheek. Even on her lips. Those lips. A spike of anger. And fear. Where's Caroline? She murmured, almost asleep. Jakob exhaled heavily. With Signa. We're looking for Soren. Agnete shook her head weakly. It wasn't Soren. I thought you said you didn't recognize the man, Jakob replied. I didn't, she whispered, eyes closed. But it wasn't Soren. He was wearing a mask. Jakob looked at Mads. He shook his head. I didn't see anyone. I've searched the whole property. Can you tell me exactly where you saw the bodies? Jakob pressed, returning his attention to her. In the mud, she moaned like an exhausted child. Something inside Mads broke. She, the steadfast activist, the woman who never backed down, lay there fragile, undone. Whatever she had seen on the sandbank had destroyed her. What if he hadn't arrived in time? No. He wouldn't allow himself to go down that path. Where, Agnete? Jakob pressed. Old boat. The nurse returned. What did you give her? Jakob asked. Propofol. Acts fast, wears off fast. Mads barely heard. Is anything broken? Doesn't seem so, but we'll confirm with the tests. And the cut? Superficial. We'll clean it and put on surgical adhesive. Mads leaned down and kissed her forehead near the cut. She let out a small whimper, already slipping into an uneven sleep. Did you see anything else? Jakob asked Mads. No. But I know where it came from. He hesitated for a second. He didn't want to leave her alone. Not for a moment. But he knew what Agnete had found was important. Vital. I can show you, he said at last. Jakob nodded, looking at Agnete, who was already resting. She'll be fine for now. I'll call her sister. He pulled out his phone and called right there. Mads stayed still, conflicted. Don't worry, the nurse said, assuming he was her partner. She'll rest a bit, we'll do x-rays, and she'll probably be able to go home afterward. Partner. Mads didn't correct him. Jakob finished the call, and dialed another number. Mads heard him leave a message. Probably someone from Dagbladet. You were lucky to have been looking for her, Jakob said when he put the phone away. Mads brushed a dry strand of hair from Agnete's lips. He thought of all the times she had stood up for him. Even when she barely knew him. With the same force Caroline had attacked, Agnete had defended him. The lucky one is me, he murmured. He leaned close to her ear. I love you, Agnete. I'll be right back. The nurse smiled discreetly. She won't even notice you're gone. Mads nodded. And before instinct forced him to stay, he forced himself to leave. Chapter 68. In the grey sea, nothing remains buried. Mikkel vomited after drinking the dirty water he had scooped from a puddle on the floor. His throat burned. His stomach contracted violently. But when he was done, he felt just a little better. He clung to that tiny improvement like a lifeline. Grandma Rosa used to say that a cheerful heart is good medicine. He thought it was from the Bible, though he wasn't sure. Right now he had no medicine. Only his mind. So he would use it. Don't fall asleep. Don't give up. Don't throw up again. He thought about that mind over matter stuff. Remembered the time he almost vomited at Grandma Rose's dinner. He forced himself upright. Held on. Waited to get out of the house until the screen door closed behind him, and then he vomited over the azaleas. A small victory. Don't think about the jellyfish. Stay awake. Focus. I'm paying attention, Dad. He worried that the jellyfish might leave its wooden throne and slide toward him to bite. But it didn't move. It stayed in the dark corner under the boards. Not exactly sleeping, its eyes remained open, watchful. Like him. Somehow he understood that if he left it alone, it would do the same. A silent pact. He felt it in his sore bones. Outside it kept raining. The night was thick with fog. He could barely make out the train bridge in the distance. The steady drumming of rain on the roof calmed him. It reminded him of other things. The sound of the sea while sleeping. Gentle spring rain. A stream murmuring over stones. The bad man won't come back, he told himself. And now that his head spun a little less, he tried to think as he should. He had to survive. Even if it was disgusting. He stuck out his tongue and imitated the jellyfish, his oral arms writhing under the bell like pale ribbons. He caught an insect crawling near his mouth. Swallowed it, without difficulty. He had seen in a war movie that soldiers ate worms to stay alive. I'm a soldier too. If he was smart, if he endured, someone would find him. They would take him home. His skin burned. His eyes too. His legs were numb, but he forced himself to feel the pain. Pain meant he was still there. The jellyfish lazily curled on the wood, and opened its mouth slowly as if showing him the way. Mikkel blinked. An ant crawled toward him on the floor. He waited. Like his friend the jellyfish. Chapter 69. 9:55 p.m. The water and the mud. The Aldrichsen property stretched over a vast expanse of marshland around Sonderholm. What wasn't theirs belonged to the city of Esbjerg. Since the 2012 annexation, the island had been split into a confusing jurisdiction. Some areas were under the city, others under Esbjerg County, others under the state, and some in practice under nobody. Irregular protection. Invisible borders. Gaps. Perfect for something terrible to go unnoticed. Jakob knew that. Luckily, the area they were about to search was partly Aldrichsen land, and partly city property. No court order was needed. Caroline would have signed it without hesitation, and he wasn't willing to waste a single minute. The operation began at the estate. They couldn't use dogs. The water and mud of the sandbank erased every trace. But they found Agnete's small boat stranded at the mouth of the sandbanks. Rain fell in sheets. They moved northeast. 20 men deployed from the point where the boat appeared, to where Mads had found Agnete stumbling through the beach grass. Some had to navigate in small boats, the water was too deep. Others advanced on foot, sinking up to their knees. Above them, helicopters cut through the night with white spotlights. Recon planes pierced the dense fog. The Western Jutland State Police. The NSK. Every available unit. Jakob felt the pressure as a constant pulse at the base of his skull. If what Agnete had seen was real, and he didn't doubt her for a second, this would change everything. They found the old boat at 9:31 p.m. It had run aground on a sandbank, surrounded by deeper channels that the tide filled and emptied without pause. Once a fishing skiff, it was now barely a broken frame, open planks, wood grey from salt, the keel exposed like a broken rib. Just enough of it stuck up at high tide to be harmless. It had probably been there since some westward storm, abandoned adrift until the mud decided to hold it. Invisible. Forgotten. The currents had piled up sediment behind the hull, and the saltwater vegetation had closed the space, forming a small natural shelter, protected from the direct ebb and flow. There they saw it. The grave. The silence that followed was thick, even under the fine rain that kept falling. There was more than one body. The damp earth and salt had frozen time in an unsettling way. On the oldest remains, skin still clung to the bone. Hair stuck to the skull, as if the tide had decided to preserve only what was necessary. Jakob clenched his jaw. Years. The coroner took control in a low, steady voice. Every movement had to be measured. Every fragment could belong to someone who still had a name, a story, a family waiting for answers. Another, more recent body showed similar signs. The brackish water had slowed decomposition but also altered some of the evidence. They would work with what remained. They couldn't bring machinery onto that unstable ground. The sandbank gave way under weight. So, clad in protective suits, tall boots, thick gloves, and using hand nets, they began to dig by hand. Mud. Water. Fragments. The rain persisted. In less than an hour, they had recovered more remains. Jakob avoided thinking of Agnete, alone on a gurney, still under the sedative. But the image returned unbidden, her broken voice almost disbelieving. There were bones everywhere. She had been right. In fragmented territory. With scattered surveillance. A place where the world looked the other way. Not this time. Not this time would it go unpunished. Chapter 70. The sea remembers. Almost an hour before Caroline left the newsroom, Soren was arrested. She made sure the news was covered. Thoroughly covered. She wasn't going to allow mistakes, after everything that had happened. She stayed in her office late, reviewing headlines, adjusting angles, correcting nuances. Control. She needed control. When she was finally about to leave, the receptionist handed her a message. Jakob had called. Too late. Her phone had died at 5. The charger, forgotten in Jakob's car. During the drive back, she had been unreachable. Vulnerable. Something she hated. By the time she arrived at Sonderholm, The sky was streaked with intermittent blue. Police lights. Helicopters roaring over the estate. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Agnete. She ran toward the main house. Locked. Empty. The air tasted of iron. She retraced her steps toward the intertidal sea. Officers were gathered on the pier. More lights over the water.
"What's going on?" she demanded of a uniformed officer.
No one answered clearly. Everything was contained movement, low-voiced orders, tension.
"This is my property." "You'll have to speak with Detective Skov," the officer replied, pointing to the lights across the marsh.
Jakob was out there. And she on solid ground. No boat, she couldn't reach him. No phone either. She thought of Signa's house. Closer. Landline. She walked quickly there. But Signa wasn't home either. And the door was guarded. "I need to use the phone." "I'm sorry, Mom. We can't let you in." The refusal hit like a wall. She returned to the main house, frustration rising in her throat. Went straight to the office. One of the 2 landlines in the entire house. Ironic, she thought while dialing. We rely too much on our phones. And when you need it, it doesn't exist. She called Agnete first. Voicemail. Then Jakob. Voicemail. Signa. Also. She checked the incoming messages. There it was from Jakob. Agnete was at Central Hospital. Minor injuries. Air returned to her lungs. From Signa, not a word.
But she knew where she had to be.
She dialed Jonas's number. Told him about Agnete. About Soren. "I'm going to the hospital," he said without hesitation. "Stay there. Find out what's happening. Call me as soon as you know anything." Caroline closed her eyes for a second. "Thank you, Jonas." She was surprised at his willingness to help, after everything. After the newspaper investigation. After the pain caused to her mother. Agnete would appreciate him being there. She didn't have Mads's number. And even if she did, she wasn't ready to call him. Apologies were necessary. For him. For Agnete.
But she still didn't know how to say them without her pride hurting.
Maybe that's why she had asked Jonas to go to the hospital. She still didn't know how to look her sister in the eyes. She went out to the pier and stood still, watching the police boats in the distance. The lights cut through the rain. The night felt unreal. And then she stopped running from the truth. She had been wrong. There was no middle ground. She had decided that Mads Pedersen was guilty. And acted accordingly. She accused him. Pushed him toward a cell. Toward a possible death sentence. A man who most likely had saved her life. And while she pursued him with the arrogant certainty of someone who believes they are right, the real culprit walked free. Soren Gron. Jakob was right. Agnete was right. She wasn't. Pride weighed on her like lead. Nothing was as it seemed. And she, who had always prided herself on seeing beyond, had been completely blind. Chapter 71. Some secrets wait beneath the water. Agnete woke in the air with a heavy head, as if the world were wrapped in cotton.
But she remembered.
Too much. Images that wouldn't leave. A small hand in the mud. The unbearable feeling of making her way blindly through broken bones, bumping into them, pushing them without knowing it. Her stomach turned. A nurse approached her bed. He smiled with that calm, practiced friendliness of someone who has seen it all. "Do you know where you are?" Agnete nodded after clearing her throat. Her usual sarcasm didn't come to her rescue. She didn't have the strength to pretend toughness. She was grateful. She vaguely remembered how he had accompanied her to the X-rays, patient, almost excessively kind. He had put a sock on her because she was cold. Now she noticed it as she moved her foot under the blanket. He checked the bed rails, as if afraid she might roll off. "Have they abandoned me?" she murmured. The nurse blinked, amused. "You've been left in good hands." She tried to smile. Her face hurt. She touched her cheek with her fingers.
"You'll have a good bruise and the eye a bit black," he explained. "But no broken bones.
And the cut won't leave a big scar." Agnete stayed still. "Scar. Tiny," he reassured her. "Adds character." She vaguely remembered hitting the bench of the boat. At that moment, she'd only thought about fleeing. Not about the damage.
"Has my sister been called?" "Her husband must have done it."
Her phone hasn't stopped ringing. "Husband."
Her heart lurched strangely.
The nurse handed her the phone and left it beside her. "Thank you." "You're welcome."
"For everything."
She tried to sit up and the world tilted. He steadied her until she was semi-upright. She checked the screen. Several missed calls from Mads. No more. So Caroline already knew. And apparently, she wasn't desperate to hear from her. Or maybe she was, and just busy. She dialed Mads. It rang until voicemail. Then she remembered the paper. She felt her sore ribs searching under her shirt. "Looking for this?" The nurse held a fragment of paper, wet, torn. "We removed it during X-rays. Not much remained." Agnete took it carefully. Tried to unfold it, but it was stuck, the ink smeared into grey blotches. Ruined.
But she knew what it was.
The handwritten and signed will. Signa had no malice. Of that she was sure.
But there had to be a reason that document had ended up in her possession.
And she would find out.
"It's destroyed," she whispered. "What was it?"
Agnete shook her head. More lies. The lies had already reached obscene proportions. Had Soren been the one to find the handwritten will, and give it to Signa? Or had her mother written it, changed her mind, and secretly handed it over? That would imply Signa had lied. She didn't believe it. It seemed more plausible that her mother had shown it to Soren, and he removed it from the will after her death. And maybe later returned it to Signa. She remembered her sister's fury that day on the porch. It wasn't fake. Either way, Soren wasn't who they thought he was. And that thought began to take a darker shape. What if, trying to protect Signa, Soren had pretended the theft? And what if he later tried to enter the house to recover the handwritten will? She knew the man in Signa's house wasn't Soren. He wore a mask.
But what if he had paid someone?
Like last time. The boy who stole her bag outside Soren's office last month could have handed her phone to someone else. Someone to lure Caroline to the ruins. Only Soren knew exactly where she had been that afternoon. And if Julie's car was in his name, if he was also Karen Hoff's lawyer. The pieces were beginning to fit, with unsettling precision. Too many connections. Too many victims. The nurse helped her sit fully upright. "Do you have someone who can pick you up?" he insisted. "Propofol works fast, but you can't drive for 24 hours. "I'm fine," Agnete lied. No broken bones. But inside she felt shattered. "We can't discharge you without someone to take you home," he added with firm kindness. Agnete held his gaze. She wasn't going to win that battle. "I'll find someone." "Perfect. I'll call the doctor." When the nurse walked away, she redialed Mads's number. This time, as the tone rang in her ear, she wasn't thinking about the scar or the bruise. She was thinking about Soren. And everything they still didn't know. Chapter 72. A bad feeling. With restless fingers on her lap, Signa waited at the Esbjerg police station for someone to tell her she could see Soren. She had gone straight from Kirstein's house after her call. Whatever they were doing inside, interrogating him, processing him, was taking too long. Something else was happening. Uniformed officers rushed past in the hall. Poorly concealed whispers. Eyes avoiding hers. Signa knew enough about the law to understand they couldn't hold him without charges beyond a certain time. She thought of calling Jonas to confirm exactly how long, but held back. Soren knew the law. And he was innocent. She knew it. Or did she want to know it? An old, stubborn foreboding began to press into her chest. She didn't want to talk to Jonas. Nor to Agnete. Nor to Caroline. Not yet. She needed to sort her thoughts. Then she heard it. Bodies buried in the mud. They said it believing no one could hear. But the waiting room was full, and every person lifted their gaze to another. Pieces quietly beginning to fit together. Signa was piecing them together too. She remembered that day, as if it were in front of her. He had come running pale, unsure what to do. It was warm. It hadn't rained in weeks, since before Sammy disappeared. The tide was low, exposing more land than usual. She was cutting potatoes for the potato salad, when he said, "I know where Sammy is." She didn't fully believe him. But that pang in her chest, that which a mother recognizes, made her follow him to the marsh. He led her to a cavity opened by the tide among the beach grass. There it was. Sammy's body bound, covered with debris and branches like seals stash their food for later. The low tide had left it exposed. Jonas then confessed he had found it weeks earlier. That he stumbled upon it by accident. That he was afraid they'd think he had harmed him. That's why he hid it. Even from her. Signa believed him. At that moment, she believed him. The body was already very decomposed. So much time had passed that bringing the truth to light seemed cruel, useless. Everyone had searched. Every beach, every cove. They didn't find him, because he was well hidden. Only now was she beginning to understand. There were bodies in the mud. The feeling in her chest thickened. This time it didn't recede. Didn't dissolve with excuses. This time it couldn't be made to disappear. She sat, reviewing every time she had stifled her doubts. And a deep sadness cut through her. What kind of mother thinks such horrible things about her own child? She felt guilty. Perhaps she had projected her father's shadow onto him. Perhaps she had seen monsters where there was only a child. She never saw him hurt anyone. People, no. She remembered Bjorn, the first black Labrador they had. Before Balder. Jonas called him toward the water from his boat. He knew a patch of quicksand was in the dog's path. Signa had gone to call animal control. When he thought she couldn't hear him, he insisted. "Come Bjorn, come." They didn't save the dog. But what haunted her for years wasn't the quicksand. It was the look on her son's face as the animal twisted in spasms. A strange calm. An almost fascinated attention. Jonas swore he was trying to pull him away from danger. She wanted to believe him. As she wanted to believe him, the day he appeared with Sammy in his arms covered in ant bites. He said the baby had sat on a red forest anthill. She doubted. And hated herself for doubting while cleaning every wound with hydrogen peroxide and cotton. There was never proof. Never a definitive act. Just that feeling. As if her son conducted misfortune, with the invisible baton of a maestro. She felt it again the morning they found Fredja. Jonas insisted on visiting early, on a Saturday, something he never did. Pancakes like in the old days. As if he knew what they would find. Fredja at the foot of the stairs. The large mirror overturned so her reflection wouldn't capture the body. Jonas helped her turn it. Mocked her superstitions but turned it anyway. He kissed her on the cheek. "Do you want me to stay? I have to leave." Then it seemed strange. Now it felt unbearable. Too many lies. Too many secrets. And each one harder to sustain. "Excuse me," she said to the officer passing by.
Where did you find those bodies?
The policeman knew who she was. He looked at her with a mix of respect and compassion. I can't give you details, ma'am. But in the Hobecht area. Hobecht? Signa nodded slowly. She sat for just a moment longer. Enough to gather the courage she had left. It was the hardest thing she would ever do. But it was long overdue. If her son was innocent, the law would prove it. She had to believe it with all her heart. And if he wasn't, then she had raised a monster. And she had to stop it. Love could no longer be a blindfold. She rose from the hallway chair, legs trembling but back straight. It was time to say what she had kept silent for years. Chapter 73. 10:25 p.m. When the tide goes out, the dead speak. After talking for a few minutes with Caroline, Agnete understood why no one had answered. Her sister's phone had been charging. They spoke just enough. The police had deployed a team in the marsh, right where she had found the bodies. Mads was out there working with Jakob. Caroline hadn't been able to speak to him directly, only overheard fragments from one of his men. Signa was at the station. And Jonas was on his way to the hospital to pick her up. I would have gone, Caroline said, but Jonas was closer. Thank God Mads was looking for you. Agnete frowned, still a little dazed from the sedative. Jonas, she asked, confused. There was a pause on the other end. A slight hesitation. No. Mads. It hurt Caroline to admit it. It showed. Agnete bit her tongue. She didn't point out that it was the second time Mads had saved one of them. Not the moment to push. She knew her sister, pride was a delicate animal. Like hers. It was a start. He'll be here soon, Caroline promised before hanging up. Agnete sat on the bed, waiting for discharge with a strange sense of disconnection. Partly from the medicine. Partly not. Caroline was home, waiting for her. And yet everything felt like it was falling apart. Sanna far away. Signa's revelations. Jonas avoiding her for days. Jonas was her brother. But she had never felt him so distant. In fact, she had never felt so far from the child she had grown up with. And Signa, the lies. The last time she had felt something like this was after Sammy's death. When their father abandoned them, and their mother shut herself off like a door that would never open again. Signa had been the glue, holding the family together. And now that glue was cracking before her eyes. What was she going to say to Jonas? Her whole life had been a half-truth. When he arrived, he didn't come inside. He called to announce he was outside. The nurse wheeled her to the exit, more to make sure she didn't grab the wheel than out of real necessity. Chivalry was over. Jonas didn't get out to help. Didn't even make the gesture. Agnete didn't notice the vehicle at first. It was dark, and the nurse kept talking. She just wanted to go home. She walked to the passenger seat herself, avoiding any effort from him. He waited, window half down. Only when she sat down did she realize. It wasn't his car. It was Signa's. Her shoulders tensed. Signa's car had been in the garage that very afternoon. She had seen it herself. How did Jonas have it? Thanks for coming to get me, she said, suddenly less confident. No problem, he replied curt. Nothing more. They left the parking lot. The hospital faded behind them. Agnete noticed that even though Jonas looked ahead, he watched her out of the corner of his eye. She settled into the seat. Her chest hurt, but the sedative's effect was almost gone. She felt herself again. The rain kept falling. The wiper fought the droplets. Silence filled the car like a third passenger. The ache in her chest grew as the medicine wore off. It's awful about Soren, she tried. Yes. Are they going to charge him? A slight shrug. Nothing more. And your mother? Is she okay?
I haven't spoken to her.
The answer was a closed door. They took the expressway home. From the road, they could see helicopters over Esbjerg. The lights swept the sky behind the tree line. Jonas was watching them too. Agnete wanted to ask about Signe. About the confession she sensed. She wanted to talk about the will. About the new and strange sisterhood that had been imposed on them.
But the words stayed in her bag.
Like a bomb. The distance between them had never felt so tangible. Then she saw it. A small red flip phone on the center console. Cheap. Probably prepaid. Jonas's was a new white iPhone. Like hers. She reached for it. New phone, she asked with forced lightness. The reaction was immediate. Jonas's hand shot out and gripped her wrist against the seat. Hard. Too hard. He looked at her. And something in that look made her neck prickle. He released her wrist. She withdrew her hand slowly. Jesus, what was that? He didn't answer. They crossed the bridge in silence. Agnete rested her head against the headrest and looked out the window. In the glass's reflection, she saw Jonas's jaw rigid. His eyes more on the sky than the road. Her gaze returned to the little red phone. She didn't dare touch it again. Jonas wasn't the type to keep old tech. Then whose was it? The wiper kept its rhythm. And Jonas began drumming his fingers on the wheel. Impatiently. Chapter 74. Useful evidence. With mud up to his knees, Jakob felt the phone vibrate in his pocket. At this point he was surprised it still worked. He hadn't submerged it, but his clothes were soaked as if he'd gone swimming fully dressed. He fumbled off his thick gloves. For a second, he wished he hadn't answered. As if the world could stay exactly where it was, if he didn't hear anything more. It was already enough. The phone stopped ringing before he could pull it out. He stepped a few paces away from the team, searching for a shred of privacy amid the chaos. He recognized the number. He called the station, identified himself, and waited to be patched through to whoever had requested him. While he waited, he looked around. The nets slid through the murky water. 2 bodies had been exhumed so far. The nets were to recover objects, rings, chains, remains. Anything that could help put names to those bones. After years under water and mud, preserving useful evidence against the killer was nearly impossible. Still, they had called in a forensic anthropologist. Identifying the victims was already a form of justice.
Jakob.
It was Dan Gertsen. He was returning to the station, after formally arresting Gron.
What do you have?
There was a pause.
It's the housekeeper.
Signe. Jakob's stomach tightened. She just showed up with an extraordinary story. And she came to tell us where to find a body. Jakob looked toward the sandbank, where another team was lifting something else from the mud. We've already found them, he said dryly. 9 so far. He didn't want Signe there. Not in the middle of this.
No, Gertsen said.
His voice was different. Serious. This one's somewhere else. Jakob set the phone aside for a moment, as if he needed physical space to absorb it. Signe. Caroline. Everything was connected. He brought the phone back to his ear. A new, colder sensation settled in his stomach. Around him the men struggled forward, dragging inflatable boats filled with remains. Spotlights from other vessels lit the scene with a harsh white glare. From where he stood, the brightness didn't allow him to see beyond, but he knew Caroline was on the Aldrichsen dock, watching. One of his men had already asked permission to search the area. He knew she wouldn't deny it. And still, he had avoided speaking to her.
Not just because he wanted to protect her.
Also because Caroline thought in headlines. And he couldn't afford to think like that now. Speak, Gertsen. Silence. Then, It's Sammy Aldrichsen. The name fell like a stone. Pedersen and his son buried the boy in the sandbank. Pedersen swallowed Jakob. I think Jonas Pedersen is our man. The noise of water, improvised shovels, murmured orders faded into the distance. Jonas. The son. The brother. Jakob thought of Caroline. How this would pierce her. He thought of Agnete, just out of the hospital. He thought of Signe, finally coming forward to tell the truth. And for a second, the mud under his feet felt firmer than anything else. Are you sure? He asked, even though deep down he already knew the answer. Because too many pieces, finally, were beginning to fit together. Chapter 75. 10:45 p.m. The northern storm. The closer they got to Sonderholm, the tenser Jonas became behind the wheel. Agnete noticed in the smallest details, the jaws set tight, fingers gripping the leather, eyes fixed too long on some invisible point. And although she tried to convince herself it was just fatigue and the medication, she could no longer ignore what stirred inside her. The red phone. Signe's car. His silence. Too many pieces that didn't fit. She tried to roll down the passenger side window. Nothing. Tried again. Closed. A shiver ran through her fingers. Jonas never activated the child lock. Nor did Signe. She turned to him with a smile she didn't feel. So, what are you doing with Signe's car? She asked lightly, forcing it. Feeling like a change. Her hands burned. She was breathing faster than normal. The helicopters were now clearly audible, the constant buzzing above them. Jonas said nothing. Didn't even mention them. He looked up as if the sound had nothing to do with them. That silence weighed heavier than any answer. I needed space to move things. I'm moving. Lying. She knew without proof, with that cold certainty that settles in the stomach. Agnete glanced at the back seat. Empty. No boxes, no bags, not a single strip of tape. You could have asked me for help, she said quietly. I would have been happy to. The words stuck in her throat. Help you. Signe's car had been parked at her house. She had seen it. She remembered exactly where it was. Jonas had the same build as the man who had entered Signe's house. Why would he force his own mother's home? It made no sense. But what if it did? Have you been driving Signe's car all day? She asked. It was a trap. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. And that look chilled her blood. His blue eyes held her a second too long. As if reading her thoughts. As if he knew exactly how far she had gone. Then he returned his gaze to the road. The hairs on her arms stood on end, one by one. Suddenly, Jonas swerved sharply onto the grade entrance. In the opposite direction from home. Panic didn't hit immediately. It slid slowly, like cold water climbing her back. Hey. I'm exhausted, Jonas. Where are we going? I want to show you something. His voice was soft. Too soft. It's late. I'd rather go home. No answer. The car sped along secondary roads. Darkness closed around them like a curtain. Agnete pressed the window button again. Closed. The helicopters disappeared behind the tops of the old oaks, but she could still hear them, distant, like a warning. Please, she whispered. Just a minute. He accelerated. Agnete's heart began to hammer violently in her chest. She looked at the red phone on the dashboard. Then at her own in her lap. Suddenly, the fog of the sedative lifted. Everything became sharp. Too sharp. The pieces. The will in her bag. The lies. Signe at the station. The bodies in the sandbank. Jonas. Her breathing grew heavy, loud. Time stretched into endless seconds where the body knows before the mind. Jonas, she said, testing the name. It sounded strange. As if it didn't belong to her.
Where are we going?
She turned on her phone to call Caroline. She didn't get to dial. He lunged for the device and hurled it out the open window without slowing down. The gesture was so fast she barely saw it. Then his hand was on her. He grabbed her hair. The pull was brutal. Her head slammed against the dashboard. A white flash. A metallic thick taste filled her mouth. Hot. And as everything went dark, a single thought, pure as an open wound. He is not my brother. Chapter 76. No one escapes the sea. Jakob hung up. He searched for Mads Pedersen with his eyes. Mads was several meters away, waist deep in the mud, taking instructions from one of the officers. He had promised not to get in the way, but in the end, every pair of hands was needed. The rain continued to fall relentlessly. Yet the chill running through Jakob's body had nothing to do with the water. It was something else. He still hadn't returned Caroline's calls. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. He didn't want to tell her anything. But he couldn't lie either. If what Dan Gertsen had just said was true, they were about to dig up Caroline's brother 25 years after his death. Sammy. 25 years. The thought made him dizzy. Signe knew where he was buried. Signe was leading them to him. And Jonas was involved. Agnete. The name hit him hard. Before alarming Caroline or Mads, he called the hospital. He waited with a sour pit in his stomach until the nurse who had attended Agnete answered. She left about 35 or 40 minutes ago, the nurse said. No broken bones. No concussion. No reason to hold her. Jakob checked the clock. 23:09. Caroline was at Sonderholm. Signe on her way to the station. Only one possibility remained. Did she say who came to pick her up? No. But a nurse wheeled her out to the exit. Wait, let me check. The phone rested on a table. Jakob listened to the distant murmur. Seconds stretched endlessly. When the nurse returned, Jakob already knew he wouldn't like the answer.
She left in a dark Tesla.
Doesn't remember the exact model. Jakob's chest tightened. He dialed Caroline's number. Where is Agnete? He asked as soon as she answered.
Jakob, she exclaimed.
I've been calling you all night. You can't just leave me like this. Caroline, he cut her off. Where is Agnete? Her tone changed instantly.
She's on her way home.
Jonas went to pick her up. The impact was physical. As if something heavy had dropped into his stomach.
What's wrong, Jakob?
He took a deep breath. He had no proof. Only a certainty cracking its way through him like a fissure. Call me as soon as you hear anything about Agnete. Right now. I'll call you in a moment. He hung up before she could ask more. Agnete was with Jonas. If they had left 40 minutes ago, they should have arrived by now. The express route from Esbjerg was short. He checked the clock again. 23:11. He called the station again. Gertsen, I need to know what car Signe came in. While waiting for an answer, he made a decision he might regret. He pushed his way through the mud toward where Mads was. He had no proof. Only intuition. But if Caroline were in danger, he would want to know. The phone vibrated before he reached Mads. She came in Jonas's Audi Q5, Gertsen reported. He says he needed her car to carry things to the Strandgate house. He's moving. Jakob froze for a second. The pieces fit together with brutal clarity. Shit. He turned as he walked. Issue an immediate alert on Signe Kjeldsen's car. White Volkswagen Passat 2024 model. Dispatch patrols to the Strandgate house. And track Agnete Aldrichsen's phone. Now. He hung up. The mud didn't matter anymore. The rain didn't matter either. Only one thought hammered in his head, as he searched for Mads among the lights and shadows. Please let us not be too late. Chapter 77. Amid sand, water, and silence, Agnete woke on a hard floor, soaked, dazed. The smell was sickly sweet, like rotting magnolias. Her head throbbed with sharp pounding pain. For a second she didn't know where she was. Then she heard a voice. Everything has gone to hell, Jonas murmured. Her mind took a moment to accept it was him. She wanted to reject it. She wanted it not to be his voice. She had a rag in her mouth. She spat it out and rolled toward the sound. Jonas hadn't realized she was conscious. He was speaking to a small figure in the corner. She squinted, forcing her eyes. A child. Crouched in the mud. Mikkel Simonsen. The little boy's photo had filled the newspapers. She remembered him in the hospital incubator. Now he was there, dirty, pale, alive. Alive. Their eyes met across the waterlogged floor. Don't speak, the boy's eyes said. Stay still. Mikkel had understood something essential. The man wasn't wearing a mask. That was bad. Very bad. She pretended to remain unconscious while Jonas murmured to himself, like adults do when they lose control. Jonas was removing the child's handcuffs. Then Agnete saw something else, almost fused with the shadow, a black jellyfish coiled near a pile of firewood. Motionless. Watchful. Jonas, she said. He ignored her for a second more, freeing the boy's wrists. Then he turned slowly. You don't have to do this, she whispered, struggling upright. Her ribs burned. I'm not an idiot, Agnete. I know exactly what I have to do. His voice was cold. No tremor. They'll know it was you. You were the only one who picked me up from the hospital. I can't control what you do. Everyone knows how stubborn you are. I'll say I left you at Pedersen's. That was the last time I saw you. She gritted her teeth. And Signa's car? What about it? He replied with a grimace. Did you tell anyone it was parked at her house? Silence. That's what I thought, he murmured, almost relieved. I left you at Pedersen's. Didn't speak to you afterward. How was I supposed to know he'd be out there with Jakob sticking his nose in? Poor Agnete. Always in the middle of what you don't understand. She tried to get up. He kicked her sharply, and she let out a whimper. Mikkel looked at her. Brave, he thought. She's hurt and yet she stands up to him. Mads saw the car, she insisted. Jonas barely smiled. Mads's brain is full of garbage. And it's your fault. He was getting too close to Julie, until you showed up. People see what they want to see. Nothing more. Agnete stared at him. You killed her too, didn't you? He shrugged. No guilt. Then Mikkel noticed the sheath tied to his leg. A large knife. The blade caught a sliver of moonlight, sneaking through an unboarded gap. They'll find you, Agnete said. No. Not a single piece of evidence points to me. The boy lowered his gaze. Not to a snake. To the water. Along the side of the building, the ground sloped into a dark channel the tide had refilled. The water flowed in and out beneath the structure, leaving brackish pools that seemed to breathe with the sea. Someone saw something, she insisted. Someone always sees something. And if they did, you won't be here to tell about it. Agnete looked around clearly for the first time. An old fishing warehouse, half sunken in the marsh. Boarded windows. Salt-swollen wood. In the distance, through the mist, the silhouette of the old railway bridge loomed over the channel. She didn't know where they were. And he wasn't going to tell her. Jonas jingled the handcuffs. Mikkel lay on the waterlogged floor, still bound at the feet. Barely upright. Something inside Agnete's chest cracked. Where are we? Jonas smiled. You've seen too many movies. This isn't the part where I explain the plan. She didn't look away. You're sick. That's all. Why do you want the boy? Let him go. So he can come back and tell. Now he knows my name. No one comes here. No one remembers this place. People go blind when it suits them. His blue eyes were thin ice. Fredja was an idiot. Giving away property, to make up for you. I wasn't going to let her uncover anything. That hurt more than any blow. Pride. Guilt. All useless now.
What are you going to do?
Jonas tilted his head. Maybe I'll leave you where the tide does the work. It's clean. Discreet. He approached with the knife. Agnete kicked him. The blade slipped across the wet floor, and fell toward the edge of the interior channel. Mikkel saw it. He wasn't strong. But he knew how to calculate. He leaned toward the knife as far as the ropes allowed. The pain in his ankle blinded him for a second. With clumsy hands he pushed the blade toward himself. Something moved in the water. A translucent mass, barely visible, trapped between the broken boards. Long, almost invisible tentacles floating like threads. Jonas cursed and lunged for the knife. He plunged his arm into the water without looking. The scream was immediate. Not fear. Pain. A sharp, dry howl. He pulled his arm back abruptly. The tentacles had wrapped around his wrist and forearm. The skin reddened instantly. Damn it. He tried to tear them off. In doing so, he brushed against her leg. More tentacles. Another burn, more intense. The jellyfish, dragged by the tide into the warehouse, wreathed in the murky water. Jonas lost his balance and fell to his knees. The pain disoriented him. He clutched his face, gasping. Agnete didn't hesitate. She crawled to Mikkel, grabbed the knife and cut the ropes. This way, the boy whispered, pointing to a gap under the floor. The metal grate had shifted. The channel connected to the outer tide. Agnete held Mikkel for a second. Take a deep breath. She pushed him into the black water. The cold was brutal. She jumped after him. The splashing drowned out Jonas cursing, still struggling against something he couldn't see. And the tide kept coming in. Chapter 78. Secrets always return with the tide. Agnete knew she had seconds. Only seconds before Jonas would get out of the warehouse and chase after them. She pulled Mikkel under the structure, toward the channel the tide had refilled. The water was deeper there, their feet didn't touch the bottom. Between the beams and the surface was barely a jagged strip of brackish air. She wasn't strong enough to hold the boy and swim away at the same time. But she had no choice. Mikkel didn't struggle. That gave her strength. She dragged him behind her, praying he could hold his breath. She didn't know exactly where they were. Everything in the Wadden looked the same, grey water, sandbanks, channels that shifted with each tide. She only knew she had to get away from the building, before the water started flowing harder. She peeked up to orient herself. Lifted the boy's head too. Inside, Jonas cursed. A sharp crack. Splintered wood. Good, she thought. Let the pain slow him down. You're going to be okay, she whispered. I know, Mikkel replied, trembling. He didn't. But he trusted her. Take a deep breath. They sank again. The water was colder than she expected. It cut her lungs. She swam toward the opening where the channel opened to the flooded flats. When she emerged from the structure, the open sky seemed unreal. And then she heard it. Helicopters. Distant but real. The tide was rising. She felt it in the pressure of the water against her body. In the sideways pull, trying to drag them into the deeper channels. I just need to reach a solid sandbank, she told herself. One that wasn't yet covered. Mikkel thrashed weakly. Still, he felt like lead. The visible shore, a dark strip of saltgrass, looked close. But Agnete knew something anyone raised there understood. What seems near in the Wadden can be separated by invisible currents. Behind them, the water churned. Jonas had gotten out. He was swimming toward them. Faster. Always the better swimmer. Stronger. Proud of his endurance. The distance she struggled to cover, he devoured. Keep swimming. The memory hit her, Jonas diving off a boat in summer, defying the North Sea's cold just to prove he could endure it. She had laughed, thinking it bravery. It wasn't bravery. It was the need to prove something. The sirens sounded clearer now. Jonas was getting closer. But his stroke was no longer clean. The arm he had plunged into the water inside the warehouse was red, swollen. The lion's mane jellyfish had left violet marks. Every movement seemed to cost him. The current shifted. Not toward the shore. Toward the central channel. Agnete felt it. Do what you would never do. Jonas would expect her to swim straight to land. It was logical. Predictable. On land he could reach her. Even hurt. She turned sharply. Swim toward the light, she whispered to Mikkel. They veered diagonally, using the sideways current forming with the rising tide. Not toward the visible shore, but toward a higher sandbank barely sticking out. Jonas tried to correct his course to follow them. But the current had already caught him. He tried to compensate. His stroke became clumsy. Pain in his arm and leg uncoordinated him. The cold water started to steal his strength. Agnete, he shouted. His voice sounded thick. The tide, now faster, pushed him toward the soft sand between two channels. He tried to plant his foot. The ground gave way. It wasn't cinematic quicksand. Worse, saturated mud offering no solid resistance. Every push sank him a little more. He tried swimming again. But the cold was already doing its work. His muscles began to fail. The water reached his chest. Then his neck. He tried to reach a firmer bank. He didn't make it. Agnete saw him only one last time. One final effort. A chaotic movement. His head emerging. Grey water reflecting the helicopter's spotlight. Then the current turned him. And he disappeared. No drama. No blood. Just the sea reclaiming what was in its way. Agnete kept swimming, until her arms no longer responded. They reached the elevated bank. The sand was firm. She dragged herself out, pulling Mikkel with her. The wind hit her wet skin. The cold began to bite now that they were out. She stood as best she could and hoisted the boy. In the distance, blue lights. Mikkel wrapped his arms around her. Thank you, he whispered. She had no breath to reply. She pressed him to her chest. And walked toward the sirens as the tide continued to rise behind them. Chapter 79. Where the sea keeps what the land wanted to forget. In total, they unearthed 3 bodies from the mud. Sammy was among them. He had been much closer. Buried in a strip of their own property, next to the ruins, beneath the salt grasses struggling to survive among harder sands. Choked by vines covered in leaves stained black and white with mold and decay. The leaves fell too early. Like lies. Like everything that had shrouded their lives for 25 years. When they found him, they took him to a dignified place. Under an old birch bent by the sea wind, silver lichens hanging from its branches like grey veils. There, beneath the tree that seemed to lean down to cradle him, he would rest beside his mother. After a quarter of a century, they finally had an ending. Now something else began. Facing it. The 3 of them together. If horror had achieved anything, it had been that, bringing them back together. Sanna bought a plane ticket as soon as she learned the truth. She would finish her book there, far from Copenhagen, far from the life that had hardened her. Caroline set a wedding date with Jakob, and ordered the storage units in Esbjerg emptied. Agnete resigned in Copenhagen. She would finish renovating the house and afterwards decide who she wanted to be. For the first time in years, she was not running. As for Signe, forgiveness was another story. She was the woman who had raised them. She hadn't known, or hadn't wanted to know, about Jonas's secret life. Only when they began pulling two bodies from the sandbank did she allow herself to look at her son differently. And then she spoke.
But she had lied.
She had hidden Sammy's body, kept it secret, and she had also protected Jonas. Understanding her motives didn't erase the damage. None of them were perfect.
But that didn't make the wound any less deep.
Agnete couldn't bear to see her suffer for a monster. Jonas had been her son. And her brother. And yet, she couldn't rescue anything clean from him. All the memories were stained. Mikkel was still in the hospital. 5 days without water or food had taken a toll on his small body. The broken ankle. Risk of losing mobility in his left leg, from the pressure and lack of circulation. And yet he smiled. The Esbjerg police planned to award him a medal for bravery. Agnete knew the truth, without him none of them would have made it out alive. If anything had been even slightly different, Mikkel would now be where Sammy had been. Or she herself. Signe didn't attend the private ceremony. It was a gesture of courtesy. That moment belonged only to the sisters. Agnete couldn't have faced a crowd. The tears she hadn't been able to shed at her mother's funeral now flowed freely. To her right, Mads held her arm firmly as if afraid she would break. To the left, Sanna stood upright, composed, leaning toward her just slightly without letting herself depend on anyone. Caroline beside Jakob looked smaller than usual, but her hand didn't leave his. They couldn't determine Sammy's cause of death with certainty. No fractures. Nothing to indicate direct violence. Signe insisted she had taken him to the beach afterward, and buried him. But now, knowing what they knew about Jonas, the story took on a darker shadow. Jonas's body never appeared. They scoured kilometers of coastline. Nothing. Agnete didn't know if it was poetic justice or a debt left unpaid. "Give us light to guide us out of the darkness and into the promise of your love," the pastor intoned. She had heard those words too many times in too short a span. "Amen," the three responded. Caroline was the first to step forward. She placed a white lily on the grave. Sanna followed. Agnete was last. The gesture was simple. But when the lily touched the earth, she understood something that hurt and healed at the same time. Her brother's empty place was no longer empty. Chapter 80. In the northern tides, everything returns. The last rays of the sun burned over the roof of the pier in the distance. Agnete and Mads sat on the loose board of the porch, facing the intertidal sea. There was a time when this landscape had felt like a sentence. The smell of salt and sulfur, the hum of insects, the murmur of thick water moving through tall grass. Everything reminded her of what she wanted to forget. Not now. Now it was different. Perhaps because the horror was no longer buried under the ground. After the year ended, they could sell the property. They hadn't decided yet. 8 months remained. Caroline had to run the newspaper. Sanna had to finish her book. She had to finish the renovation. 8 months could change everything. If Sanna was brave enough to tell it, there was a story worth writing. Inside the house, Caroline, Sanna and Jakob were talking with Signe. Punishing her for Jonas's sins seemed unfair. But forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. Signe had gone with Soren to tell them she would donate her property to the city, as Fredja had decreed in her will. Soren had proposed. They would move downtown. For Signe, leaving that house was a form of penance. For Agnete, restoring it was another way to heal. The police would not press charges. Signe hadn't known her son's crimes. Her greatest guilt had been loving poorly. The silence on the porch was serene. Not uncomfortable. Agnete took a deep breath. Could she call this place home again?
It looks like a painting, Mads said quietly. Yes.
The coastal heather was beautiful. It always had been. She simply hadn't known how to look at it without anger. Mads dug into his shirt pocket and closed his hand over something. They say if you wait for the perfect moment to have a child, no one would ever have children. Agnete looked at him, surprised. I've never been very good at doing what's supposed to be done. He slid forward onto his knees in front of her. Agnete's heart leapt. And you're right, he continued. Proposing to the woman I love by message was clumsy. He opened his hand. A silver ring. A deep emerald, green as the coastal heather at dusk. His pale blue eyes shone with a mix of pride and vulnerability that almost disarmed her. Agnete Aldrichsen, will you marry me? The only woman I have ever loved, his eyes said. Agnete looked at the ring. Looked at the man who had stayed by her side when everything was falling apart. Tears came without asking. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. In that moment, something twinkled in the air between them. A tiny flash. A firefly. It had been years since they had even seen one here. The insect blinked once, suspended like an electric spark above their heads, then rose into the darkness. Agnete held her breath. She remembered another night on this same porch. She and Sanna counting fireflies, searching for a sign, a promise. None appeared. They went to bed convinced that hope was a story for others. And now? Mads couldn't know what it meant. But he sensed the emotion running through her, and kissed her gently. I love you, he murmured. He drew her to his shoulder. Agnete rested her head, and let the sound of the intertidal sea wrap around her. If you looked closely, more lights began to flicker among the tall grass. One. Then, another. And, another. As if the place had finally decided to return their hope. The end. Author's note. There are landscapes that are not just seen, they are heard. The Wadden Sea is one of them. Anyone who has walked across its intertidal plains knows that everything there breathes with an ancient rhythm. The tide moves in and out, revealing what was hidden and then covering it again. The sand holds footprints for a moment, but the water always reclaims everything. That cadence, that patient way of returning what seemed lost, was the starting point of this story. Agnete's last tide is born from that idea, that no secret stays buried forever. Sooner or later, something brings it to the surface. This novel is my first foray into the thriller. Before it, I had written 2 short novels, narrative exercises that allowed me to explore language and rhythm, but here I wanted to take a different step, to build a story where narrative tension coexists with a deeper interior look at the characters. Thrillers often rely on movement, investigation, suspense. Yet I have always been interested in the silent territory, where human decisions are born. That is why at the center of this novel, there is not just a crime, but a question. What happens in the mind of someone who decides to cross that line? Modern criminology reminds us that extreme violence rarely emerges from nowhere. In many cases, it is linked to early wounds of identity, abandonment, or humiliation. In the case of Jonas, the antagonist of this story, the origin is not simple abstract evil, but something more disturbing, a fracture in the way he relates to the world. Growing up without a stable attachment figure, feeling invisible or insufficient, can generate a dangerous mix of shame and resentment. When that resentment finds no words, it sometimes seeks control. And absolute control is the prelude to destruction. This is not about justifying violence, but understanding its root. Literature, like criminology, tries to look where we usually prefer not to look. But this story does not belong solely to human darkness. It also belongs to the landscape. Northern Europe has a particular way of narrating time. Here, transformations are rarely violent or spectacular. They are slow, silent, inevitable. Ice cracks and the fjord breathes again. Migratory birds return every spring with new plumage. Seals shed their coats. Even the dunes change shape with every storm. Nothing remains the same after winter. I wanted that natural logic to also permeate the language of the novel. The tides, the sand, the grey sea wind, the silence of the wetlands do not appear merely as scenery, but as metaphors for what happens inside the characters. Because people, like the landscape, also change with time. They also erode. They also hide layers beneath the surface. Agnete inhabits precisely that in-between space, the place where the past insists on returning, but where it is still possible to choose who you want to be. Perhaps that is why this novel speaks so much about what comes back, about what hides, about what returns with the tide, and about hope, always fragile, always necessary, that even in the greyest landscapes a new form of light can appear. Thank you for accompanying me to this shore. Rebecca. About the author. Rebecca Nystrom. The power of stories resonates within me with an almost visceral clarity. Facts and data alone are not enough. We need narratives that pierce the veil of reason and reach the heart, the bones, that ancient knowing we all carry inside. Stories that return us to our essence and awaken us. Perhaps because there are truths we recognize even if we cannot explain them, and stories are the keys that allow us to remember. For me, writing has also been a form of evolution. Over time, I realized that the more consciously I made decisions in my life, the stronger and more self-sufficient I became. I live and think outside the ordinary, convinced that energy flows toward where the mind is directed. I write to understand myself better, to bring clarity to the past, to situate myself in the present, and to orient myself toward the future, trying to find in that process the brightest moments of this world. As my dear Virginia Woolf would say, it is a pity not to say what one feels. As I write, I discover that deep within there are truths we sense without knowing how. That is why stories in some way help us recognize them. Writing also means dissolving myself in those ancient narratives and looking beyond the past, traversing the moments when I was rejected, hurt, or broken, the places where I suffered and struggled. In the end, all I have done is write, and that act has become an honest and profoundly meaningful labor for me. 9 years ago, I moved to Denmark, this archipelago of islands, in search of a life more connected to writing. Many of my narratives are born from old legends and traditional tales that I reinterpret in my own way, attempting to keep alive the emotion, the atmosphere of those lands, and the intensity of impossible loves. Thank you for opening this space. I would love to hear from you, and from my corner of the world, continue weaving my thread into this great tapestry of stories. With love and deep gratitude. Rebecca.